Hello, everyone. We're going to give people a moment to file in virtually, and we'll get started soon. Can you give it just a minute more while people tune into their screens, finish their lunches or grab their lunches, and we will get started. So it looks like we have a critical mass. So I'm going to get started. Good afternoon. I'm Ben Prosky, Executive Director of the American Institute of Architects New York chapter. Welcome to day 2 of the annual Planscape Art Conference organized by ASLA New York, AIA New York, and the APA New York Metro chapter. I'm so grateful to our friends and colleagues at the APA and ASLA who have worked tirelessly with us and alongside to organize this event. Pivoting to an online conference and keeping the energy going is a challenge, and the incredible conference committee has done an excellent job. Yesterday, Max mentioned that this conference has been going on for about 8 years, I believe, and I've been involved in the past 4, and I think the conversations that we are having here are vital, especially now as we look to rebuild not only a sustainable and beautiful city here in New York and across the nation, but livable, equitable, and racially just cities. And I do think that the conversations we have had throughout this conference and are having now are incredibly important to that work. So the theme of this year's conference is At Every Scale, examining how design professionals confront issues at different physical scales. Yesterday, we heard from several insightful speakers in sessions about public health and transportation, both timely issues considering the effects of COVID-19 on our cities, as mentioned. Today, we will have 2 more sessions. First, on technology, and second, examining the role of our respective professions at different scales. Before we get to that, I want to thank our conference sponsors, Victor Stanley and Country Casual Teak, who have helped make this possible. To launch into today, we are fortunate to have an excellent keynote speaker. In a moment, we'll be hearing from Jumaane Williams, the New York City Public Advocate. And let's face it, we can talk about all these issues, but we need to learn about how to engage with politics and advocacy in order to get so many of the policies we need to make our cities better done. And so Jumaane Williams has been an incredible player in this and a listener and a voice. In his role, he acts as a watchdog for everyday New Yorkers, fearlessly challenging elected officials to act in the best interests of all New Yorkers. The public advocate has been particularly vocal on those equity issues most relevant to our professions: affordable housing, mass transit, criminal justice, and city services. Many of us also fondly remember when, as a city council member, he served as chair of the City Council's Committee on Housing and Buildings. We are very fortunate to have a citywide elected official who cares so deeply for issues of design and construction industries. Unfortunately, the public advocate cannot make it in person, but in the ways of our virtual conferences, he has sent us some pre-recorded remarks that he made for this conference. So please join me in welcoming our great public advocate, Jumaane Williams and hearing his message. Thank you and have a great conference.
We can't hear him.
Thank you for having me speak to you today. And thank you for taking up the critical role you play in shaping our city. Thanks to the New York chapters of American Planning Association, the American Society of Landscape Architects, and American Institute of Architects. Whether in the infrastructure that sprawls beneath our streets or the skyscrapers that tower above it, city planning, design, and architecture have a monumental impact on how New York grows and changes, how communities are built, how they thrive, or how they struggle. It's a serious responsibility, one I know you all respect and take on with great recognition of its importance. You know, I've always said that New York City is what it is because of two things: our public transportation infrastructure and the fact that we learned to build up. If we look the same way today that we did 100 years ago, we wouldn't be in New York City. And if we look the same way in 100 years as we do now, we will have failed. But in that design and development, it's vital to grow in a way that is beneficial, not detrimental to New Yorkers, to do things with community, not to them. We have seen consequences in the past and potential consequences on the horizon of not working with communities, especially in lower income neighborhoods and communities of more color. They face environmental and health consequences of oversaturation and underinvestment. I'm currently working on legislation to require a racial impact study alongside an environmental study so that we can build better, preserving our environment and our communities. New design themselves should heavily consider and feature environmental and energy efficient concerns. Moving forward, we can and must do better to be responsive to both community needs and citywide needs. We need truly income targeted affordable housing. But there are real challenges of density, of zoning and rezoning to build, and of communities' need to build power. Zoning, design, construction needs to be contextual, and that we can expand while holding true to the character and needs of a neighborhood, allowing enough light, air, ventilation in our buildings, and health facilities, healthy food options, green spaces in our neighborhoods. The need to consider public health in our design has only been highlighted and exacerbated by this pandemic. And in recovering from it, we must envision a long-term future that is conducive to public health and safety. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you to build that future in our city. Peace.
Hello, everyone. Hi. I would just like to say thank you to Jumaane Williams. I wish you could hear me and give his thanks, but it's really such a pleasure to have him participate in this event. I think that brief video tells us that he is very aware of a lot of the issues that we are working with in our profession, and also a lot of the issues that we are discussing here at this conference. I'm not sure if I'm live, if people can see me. But yes, okay, thank you. I just got a thumbs up. Thank you. So, hello again, my name is Annie Berglund. If you were here yesterday, welcome back. If this is your first day at this event, then thank you for joining us. This is day 2 of the Planscape Arc Conference. We had 2 wonderful sessions yesterday, and this afternoon we have a really wonderful session, two wonderful sessions, actually, I should say. Our first panel is centered on the topic of technology and the ways that our professions are transformed by the advanced technological tools and data analytics that are at our disposal. I'm pleased to introduce the moderator for the next session, Dr. Anthony Townsend. Dr. Townsend works at the intersection of urbanization and digital technology. He is the urbanist in residence at Cornell Tech's Jacobs Institute, where his research focuses on scenarios and ethical frameworks for urban tech innovation. Anthony is also a published author and the founder and president of Star City Group, a consultancy firm that works with industry, government, and philanthropy on urban tech foresight, policy, and planning studies. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Townsend.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm just going to throw up a slide to start the discussion off. I want to just frame the next 90 minutes with this kind of provocation. It's actually Cedric Price, who many of you may know as one of the gang in London in the late 60s as part of Artogram, who in one of his essays, I believe it was the title, claimed that technology is the answer, but what was the question? When we frame the opportunity that the digital revolution presents us, we often, get so enamored of the possibilities, which are vast, but we, get so wrapped up in the tools that we forget what we were doing it for. And it's important to always come back to that. I think especially right now, that's important because we're at a really unique inflection point where cities are rebooting. We've had this crisis of dispersal, this splaying out of activity in response to coronavirus, most acutely in New York City and the region, which has just challenged all of us to think about how the city's going to function going forward. We've had a crisis of governance as all of our civil rights failures have come back to haunt us and demand action and response and systemic change. And then coming on top of those two, we have a fiscal crisis now that is coming, with a fury that I think we're going to feel going into the winter quite intensely. Those are all opportunities. There are opportunities to fix the way cities work, to rethink, the assumptions of the past, whether it's about how we design space or how we design, democratic systems, or how we design, the ways we take money from one group of people and give it to another group of people. At the same time, urban tech is rebooting itself. We've seen specific technologies like face recognition get singled out as really sort of bad roads to go down for lots of applications and lots of contexts in cities. Most recently, Portland has taken pretty decisive action to restrict the use of face recognition technology. We've seen the role of the private sector in introducing and operating and designing and even governing technology and the data it creates be questioned and rejected, most visibly in the Sidewalk Toronto project, in which Alphabet's sister company, Sidewalk Labs, after about 3 years of intense lobbying and deep planning, finally turned away from an opportunity to build what would have been probably one of the biggest and most profitable urban developments in the last couple decades. And also business models that depended upon density, whether it's WeWork or Uber or Airbnb, have really been called into question. And so the opportunity here is these two things come together is we're rethinking cities, we're rethinking these new technologies and how they can be put to use. How do we reset this notion of smart cities or urban technology on a more ethical and inclusive path? I think we've figured out how to make it efficient. That, something that the engineers kind of focused on from the very beginning. But the other thing has got sort of postponed, and now the reckoning has come, and it's time to deal with it. So I'm really delighted to have three people who have been working at this question from different angles today, and we're going to hear from all of them. They are Noel Hidalgo, who's the Executive Director of Beta NYC, Anya Domleski, who's the Director of Research for SWA Group, and Sarah Williams, who is a professor at MIT's Department of Urban Studies and Planning. So I'm going to turn the stage over to Noel to start us off. And basically, we're gonna bring the speakers up in a really straightforward order. I'm going to ask Noel to speak to the question of who should use technology to engage, manage, plan, and design the city. Ask Anya to show through her work how they should do that, and ask Sarah to reflect through her experience as well as her exciting new forthcoming book about why they would want to do that. So if we can bring Noel up, that would be great.
Great. You stopped sharing, so now I can hop in here. Woohoo! Thanks, Anthony. At times I forget, like, you know, normally if we were doing this, it would be really formal, and now that we're in each other's living rooms, this seems a little bit more homely. I first want to congratulate this conference for yesterday's session. I was able to tune in, and it looks like New York City's greatest mayor that we've ever seen listened and participated and has capitulated and has now said that open streets and open restaurant streets will be year-round and will be permanent. And as a group of passionate people, you know, I think we can all celebrate the fact that the public space is returning to the people for the great conversations that the public advocate identified. You know, it has been since the 1950s that New York City has essentially turned over its streets to the car and to trucks for the purpose of transit and commerce. And now in the 21st century, we finally have an enlightened leadership that is willing to turn it over to the people, so that way we can do all of the other great things that were mentioned yesterday in the session, which I think were really amazing. So that way we can eat, we can play, we can educate, we can enjoy each other, and we can get back and get a little resemblance of the dignity that we had before we lost it and were locked away in our respective apartments. I am going to briefly chat about some of the struggles that we are facing within a civic technology community here in New York. The first question is, now that we are in the midst of this pandemic and it doesn't seem that we're going to get the federal government leadership that we need, how do we move together when we are literally so far apart? Beta NYC is a civic organization that has that was founded as a meetup, and we are now a nonprofit, and our mission is to improve the lives of New Yorkers through technology, data, and design. We have spent the last few years exclusively focused on demystifying technology. We don't want to make it look like it's magic. They're very conscious design decisions that go into the creation of technology. There are explicit political and social beliefs that get baked into the interaction. And we want to pull those things apart and really educate our brothers, sisters, neighbors, cousins, and you know, as many people as possible to understand the decisions that go into the construction of technology and ultimately increase people's digital and data literacy. Our four core values that are at everything that we do are what we see are the four freedoms of the 21st century, as the freedom to connect, the freedom to learn, the freedom to innovate, and the freedom to collaborate. And they stand together with the four freedoms of the 20th century that were indicated by FDR and then further advocated by Eleanor Roosevelt, which are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Our journey is from a community to now a full-fledged nonprofit with a whole stack of interlocking programs. What we fundamentally work on is that we build a tech talent pipeline for CUNY students. For the last 6 years, we have been working with an amazing group of undergrads, associate's degree students, and grad students to give them the framework and the professional development opportunities so that way when they graduate, they are able to compete in this modern workplace. Quite a bit of research and build human-centered tools. These tools and our research really focus on that intersection that Anthony articulated. We want technology to be used within the purpose of the civic framework of decision-making. So that's elected officials, nonprofit organizations that are advocating for things like public space, community boards, other groups like the education councils, or whether you're police precinct. We want data and information to be in those conversations. We don't want to be dependent upon those conversations, but we do want to make sure that information is brought up into those conversations. So that way it's not just some community representative who's saying, I believe this because I've been here for 50 years, and so therefore what I say is the God honest truth. And then ultimately, to make sure that these two things, our talent and our career pipeline, works with our research and tools, we have to go out and we have to teach people. And so we've created a public education program, and we do quite a bit of advocacy to make sure that the city's making smart procurement decisions around technology, data, and design. I'm going to skip over a few of these slides just for brevity. Something that I would like for you to look at is the People's Roadmap to a Digital New York City. It actually is kind of our bedrock. This is what we used to identify our mission, vision, and values. It identified 34 different proposals. We were able to get 14 pieces of legislation introduced, and 9 laws were passed. Most of those laws happen to surround the city's open data law. So hopefully you're an open data user. The open data dictionaries, the data standards, the timeliness of updating the technical standards manual, the fact that there are open data coordinators in every single agency, that there is an audit and accountability reports that are coming out every single year. Beta NYC was instrumental with working with city council members to make sure that our city has the best open data law in existence, and then also has not only complementary legal framework to ensure that it is the best, but also has the resources to ensure that it is properly staffed. We have a number of publications. If you work with community boards, we have identified the data and design challenges that community boards face. As you can imagine, there are many when you're dealing with such a diverse population like community boards. I would advise you to take a look at our publication on our website. We have done some anthropological deep dives to community boards. Some of the tools that we have produced are go through this process called Research and Data Assistance Request. So if you ever need any help on how to take a look at data, go to beta.nyc/radar. And this is a tech support way to get to the tools that we have produced. Our tools primarily surround themselves around data, New York City open data, particularly. BoardStat is a simple, easy to use dashboard around 311. Boundaries map is a map that enables you to see all of the political and administrative boundaries that are overlapped on top of each other. Through COVID, we were able to make a series of what's open maps, which are essentially essential businesses. So neighbors were documenting what were the hours that businesses were open and closed. We've created this tool called SLAM, which links together state liquor authority data, noise complaint data, open restaurant data, and sidewalk cafes. And then we build other tools that help enhance kind of your data analytical needs. So we have a lightweight geocoder if you want to locate some data here in New York City. We also run a number of classes and workshops, which are currently virtual through this whole experience. We do these things called data journeys, where we teach community board members and our fellows essentially how to understand data. We want to exemplify how data is used within the decision-making process. Once again, we don't want to make decisions fundamentally around data, but we gotta help inform the process. So that's what these trainings do. We offer 5 different classes. The first 4 classes are really a stepped process that teach people from the very basic beginnings of literally walking in off the street. We were in a basement out in Brownsville and found ourselves kind of perplexed of how do we break down these walls? How do we disentangle the technical conversations that we have that are enshrined in data, which are really like privileged pieces of information? How do we pull them apart? And so our classes really step people through. Our 101 has an example of a card game that you can take little pieces of paper, shred them up, write the core elements of open data, and you can learn and teach people how to do sort, filter, group, count, and pivot, the ultimate pivot table. So we've designed our classes to be as accessible as possible. They work their way up through a number of different literacy components. Ultimately, you learn how to go on a data journey. And then our last class, our 5th class, was in partnership with the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics and the Queens Public Library, which fundamentally teaches you how to teach all of these classes that you have taken or that you've gone through. We want to build up data literacy, right? I want to make sure that that is understood, because data is such a privileged way of speaking. So is math. And so we are looking to build the next generation of civic and urban data analysts. We do this through the Civic Innovation Fellows program, which I pointed out. These are primarily undergraduate students from CUNY schools. They have, we are currently stepping into our 7th year. They go through a 7-month boot camp, and they are trained in the fundamentals of the curriculum that I just spoke about. They also receive an in-depth GIS curriculum and a project management, as well as understanding how it is to work in a modern office environment using Google Docs and Slack. And in the 2nd semester, we have them work on radars, which help do tech support. And our fundamental goal is to not only work with them and empower them and do some onboarding of the next generation, but also then to get them employed in various locations that have a connection to the urban environment. So this year, we've instituted an apprenticeship program where community boards are able to hire our graduates of our fellows and essentially work intimately with the apprentices and Beta NYC to enhance different practices. I will skip and move forward. What we have been able to do is to get our curriculum and our education practices into the Computer Science for All program in New York City. And so last year and the year beforehand, there was an academic competition called Hack League that spanned all 5 boroughs. That taught kids essentially how to look at urban data, how to identify issues that they could relate to, express themselves using computer science principles, then come to a borough-wide hackathon where they would compete with their peers, that they could then get advice and seek feedback from subject matter experts, whether it be from the social sphere of the city, or whether it was from the nonprofit group that's providing services, to city officials that are helping run these different programs. The students would then work through these various wireframes. They would then be judged by nonprofit executives or computer science people or city officials. And ultimately, the winners of those borough-wide hackathons would get to City Hall, literally into City Hall chamber, and they would be able to compete against each other. We weren't able to have our 2nd hackathon due to the citywide hackathon because of COVID, but the opportunity here is frank and clear. Our youngest members of our community have a voice. They know what the problems that they are experiencing. Older community members don't necessarily always give them the opportunities to express themselves. But if we arm them with a little bit of magic that is technology, that is data, those community members turn around and are intrigued by what these young people, younger community members can say and talk about inside of a community. And so we hope that once funding is restored to the Department of Education, that we can continue these hack leagues. And we're actively exploring how to continue this program in a virtual manner. Just to give you a numbers perspective, for each year, 1,500 students were exposed to the city's open data program that hit 100 different schools per year. And lastly, you know, we see ourselves as a platform to get more people engaged regardless of industry discipline. So we have turned the annual anniversary of the city's open data law into a birthday party. We call this NYC School of Data, is our conference that we run. That is bookending Open Data Week, which is a 7-day festival that's dedicated to the conversation of technology and data. We fundamentally want to see you know, this information be used in all these different practices, and we want to demystify how open data and technology is used across the city. We want to make sure that it's used for good and that we can talk about the problems that we're experiencing. All of these programs, you know, historically we're running on in-person environments. And so we're now challenged to, how do we do this in the virtual way? How do we keep our professions and keep our intimate relationships moving forward professionally in the way that we can't be sitting next to each other? And so I just want to say, take care. Thank you for this opportunity. This is some of the problems that we face, and I hand this back to Anthony.
Well, thanks, Noel. I think it's just a remarkable number of things that you've managed to accomplish in such a short time, and really, you know, set the city on a path towards a much more inclusive civic tech future. And you managed to stay exactly in your allotted 15 minutes, which is remarkable. Next up, I'd like to welcome Anya Donlevsky, who's the Director of Research for SWA Group. Hi, Anya.
Hello, hello.
You ready?
Yeah, I am. I'm going to share my screen here. So I am the, like Anthony said, the Director of Research at SWA Group, and SWA Balsley, our affiliate in New York City. I'm a landscape architect as well. And SWA Group does landscape architecture, urban design, and planning. And for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about a project that we did within our practice-based research group, Excel Lab, to understand how people behave in urban space now. The project is called Plaza Life Revisited, and we started collecting data in 2018 for this project. So Plaza Life Revisited reconsiders writer William H. White's multi-year street life project in New York City and the seminal social life of small urban spaces. So the book on the left you see, and the 1979 film on the right, some stills from that. So we're really trying to reassess small urban spaces for today, sort of 40 years on. Our goal was actually similar to White's, but broader in scope. We sought to understand, one, how the types of new public spaces have changed in some 40 years after White published his book and film. Two, what has changed in public life that has affected how people use public realm spaces. And three, what makes for well-used spaces. So this is just, like Anthony said, this is just one example of how one might use technology to answer some questions in a design context. So White used hand mapping, tabulation, and time-lapse video. We used emerging technologies along with analog methods, which I'll describe a little bit later. So the project looked at 10 plazas in Manhattan by 10 different designers, and these were constructed or renovated in the last 15 years. Keeping with the conference theme, our scale is the site scale. So we'll be talking kind of about how technology works with our sort of typical bounded site. So we looked at new types of public space, and these sites range from the type of bonus plazas that White was observing to infrastructural leftovers, alleys, transit plazas, private campus spaces, and tactical urbanist interventions. So we collected sort of heterogeneous types of spaces for this. We also wanted to understand new types of public life. The project hypothesized that public life had significantly changed in 40 years, not a shocker. And we were especially attentive to changes in group and individual behavior related to the rise of ubiquitous computing, more sophisticated surveillance and policing, and a more diverse workforce. So we tracked occupation, and we used some of the same analog techniques that White did. So observations, site measurements, and hand tabulation to study occupation. Location, volume, time, and aggregation were mapped and tallied. And we also tracked individual and aggregate behavior. We used newly available analytical tools, a machine learning algorithm with footage as the input to develop heat maps, which you see here. And these described dwell time, frequent and infrequent usage, and preliminary pedestrian counts. On all of the sites, both analog and digital methods were used. And at 51 Astor Place, which you can see here, the progress of the machine learning algorithm as it uses video footage to anonymously identify humans, that's the blue and white boxes, tally their number, and track their progress across the frame. On the same site, here's a still from a video clip which is overlaid with the aggregate heat map describing the high dwell time and most traverse spaces in red here. This is during the lunch hour on a June weekday. So you can see, let's see if I can pull up a video. So you can see this in a more animated way. So this is an overlay of the video, slowed down a bit. So the red spaces, you can see a major corridor here where people are moving. It's a little bit foreshortened, so you don't see red the whole way through. You can see an entrance out of the building here has more increased traffic. And then you can see on the benches places where people have stayed for a long time also appear in red. I won't go through all 10 sites, but this is just another look at a site near a little more north, Plaza 33. There's a temporary intervention, and you can see how people are moving through that site at a bit of a quicker clip. This is Peter Minute Plaza. Again, we have some foreshortening. This is just outside the ferry terminal to Staten Island. And you can see spaces, again, where people are sitting for long periods of time and are constantly traversing in red here. This is Grace Plaza, another small plaza. This one has been renovated significantly. And was also part of White's original study, mostly due to its failures. This is a temporary intervention, Flatiron Plaza. Here we have a lot of traffic. This is basically a traffic island that was converted to dining. It's right in front of the Flatiron building, so a lot of people will come and take pictures. You'll see a lot of selfie action in the foreground. So I will, after I'm done, I'll share the link to this through chat, so you guys can see this if you want to spend a little more time viewing the actual videos. So I'll go back to my slides. I just want to highlight that machine learning is a type of artificial intelligence, just for some background. So it's a type of AI. We did not use any facial recognition, so that's not a part of it.
Anya, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yeah,
but is it possible for you to speak a little bit louder? I think the sound's a bit low.
Sure, no problem.
Thanks.
Is that a little better?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, great. So any designer could use machine learning for visualization, simulation, coordination, or prototyping, but we actually used it for analysis, since the algorithm makes it possible to process a large amount of data. So in our case, we used it to analyze film, which it broke down into images, so 30 per second. So a lot of images for, say, a 10-minute segment of film. Then it detected our selected class, which is humans, and ignored everything else. So the goal of this study was to identify common behavior patterns, collective activity, programming, physical elements, and understand the context across the 10 sites in order to inform future public realm design. And our findings and methods were published in a booklet called Field Guide to Life in Urban Plazas, which was distributed in print as well as online as a free downloadable PDF, which I'll send a link to as well in the chat. The field guide includes 25 takeaways for designers and are titled with names such as the donut effect, backmosphere, lizarding, and chit-chat mooring. Hopefully memorable. And these describe a phenomena that observed on 3 or more sites that we studied. And each takeaway includes possible tactics for designers to enhance or mitigate the observed phenomenon. So for instance, here, the donut effect that we observed was that people actually tended to occupy the edges of a plaza before filling in the middle. So this is a way that designers can understand how to design for that. There'll be a higher density of occupation on the edge before people occupy the center, usually 50 to 75% of the spaces are full before people migrate into the interior. So the design tactics here might be to design for the edge more intensely, or to activate the void with some sort of attractor that people could gravitate towards. So that's an example. This is just our first takeaway, and there's 24 more. So to conclude, this study is going forward in another iteration. Our next question was basically, how can we understand what happens at night or in evening times on our sites? So we're experimenting with an extension of this New York study on international sites. And there we'll be using infrared data that allows for evening site usage to be captured. And as a consequence, it also actually allows for a higher level of anonymization. Since it's not capturing images, it's just capturing a thermal signature. So with that, I will hand it back to Anthony and send those links via chat. Thank you.
Anthony, you're on mute.
Hi. Being able to capture all this activity data, do so in ways that don't intrude too much on the level of kind of watching that's already going on, in order to create better public spaces, I think is something where we can really start to interrogate some of these ethical questions, like, what is the data that planners and designers require in order to do their job better and create public value? And where does that start to, raise concerns? And what are the mechanisms that get put in place? What are the ethical processes, that designers go through as they deploy these kind of instruments? And how does that all shape out going forward? I think this is the kind of thing that we're going to have to figure out and practice as you are, and we're going to have to start to teach at some point too. So thank you very much for bringing those up. It's a fascinating study. Next, I want to welcome up Sarah Williams from MIT, who I believe somewhere on the screen. Where are you, Sarah? Hey, there you are.
I'm
All right.
here, and I will share my screen now.
Can you get out of your way?
Good to see you guys. Everybody can see my screen? Hope so. And hear me,
Yep.
I'm not on mute. First of all, I just want to say thanks so much for having me today. It's really great to speak with Noel and Anya, and particularly data literacy is really important to the work that we do in the lab. So I really appreciate the work that Beta NYC and Noel has been doing. When we started to talk about what we were going to talk about today, Anya and I have a very similar project, and I thought it would be nice to show that. So we'll talk a little bit more, but thanks for bringing us together. I really appreciate it. So I run the Civic Data Design Lab at MIT, and my research lab believes that big data will not change the world unless it's synthesized into tools that have a public benefit. So what does that mean? Our lab takes data like this. This is an older project in the lab that looked at data when people arrived in the prison system and where they lived before they went to prison. And we added it up block by where they lived before they went into prison, and found there are many blocks where over $1 million is spent to incarcerate people. And for example, these 17 blocks, over $17 million is spent to incarcerate, but little money is spent to address the systemic reasons for the high rates of criminal activity. For example, reentry programs, better healthcare, better job training programs, better education, all of the things that could help the systematic issues that cause higher incarceration rates, along with an increase in the prison system itself. We use these maps to have a conversation with the community in the Architecture League about what would happen if we spent just $1 million of that dollars and then reinvested it in the community itself. These maps were seen in an exhibition in the Museum of Modern Art, and you can see them here, by a congressman who used them to advocate for Criminal Justice Reinvestment Act of 2010 that allocated $25 million for reentry programs. And I think that I like to show this older project, and it's particularly relevant today as we talk a lot about issues about defunding the police and reallocating funding that we spend in our criminal justice system to the systemic and public health issues associated with that. And I really I kind of use this example here just because people are still using this map, but this is an older project from 2006, but people are still using this map to advocate for their own action. And so I call the method of using data this way, data for action, which involves building expert teams to collect data, quantify it, ground truth it, open it up to the public visualize the results, and ask people to interpret them. And I believe it's really an iterative process of using data for empowerment rather than impression. The methods that I describe, including this project, are in my new book, which has just been released, called Data Action. And I hope that you guys can all take a look at it. But today I wanted to talk about a project called Benchmark, which is relevant to some of the work that Anya was talking about. And one of the things that I advocate for in the book is that data should be available to everyone, and that sometimes communities need to create that data creatively and find ways to share it. So Benchmark is a project that allows people to measure the quality of their public spaces using tools that they can build. So similar to Anya's project, we were interested in how we can measure the impact of public space, and thinking in particular how we can measure projects where cities try to transform that space. So if you're not familiar, but this is Boston City Plaza, which is just a horrible public space. And the city has been attempting to create pop-ups and other activities. Of course, all pre-pandemic, you guys. Hopefully we'll go back to a time where we can have fun in these public spaces. And, you know, this project was very much part of some of the temporary urbanism projects that are in and around the city of Boston, but have become a popular way amongst designers, planners, and landscape architects to experiment with new potential for public space. But one of the things that we realize is that we don't really have a way to measure how successful these temporary urbanism projects are. And urban designers and planners have worked to answer this question of good public space. Jan Gehl is one of them. Excuse me, in his Life Between Buildings. And then, as Anya mentioned, William White has attempted to measure public space in his book, The Small Social Life of Urban Spaces. And many of these projects involve tallying or counting on a pen and paper, and we thought, how can we create an open source digital measurement tool to quantify human interaction within public spaces? So how to take what used to be a very manual process and make it digital. So we looked at a number of different sensors and tools that we could use, including vision analytics, like we saw in Anya's project, GPS tracking, infrared beams, LiDAR sensors, Bluetooth technologies, and even looking at, let's say, weather and speed, air quality indicators as well. And then we decided to build a sensor and test out different elements in the urban environment. And here are some of the students in my lab and researchers in the lab putting that together and figuring out ways in which we can use the sensors to quantify the people moving through the public space. We used Yale Institute's design for measuring public space. So they have a protocol which they use to measure people, activities, objects, to quantify the activity of the space itself using these sensors. And we applied it to a plaza in MIT that we thought could use a lot of help. This plaza is in front of Building 9. It could really be activated a lot better. It's right on Mass Ave, right in front of the main entrance to MIT itself, and is hardly used as a public space. One of the things that we identified as kind of the barrier between the steps and the plaza itself. And we created a temporary urbanism project for the plaza where we designed a series of movable furniture. And each one of these furniture designs were added to a toolkit that we produced, and people can build on their own, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second. But here's some of the furniture in action and on the plaza itself. This shows the plaza on install day. And we then set out to measure our intervention with the sensors and the data visualization. And so ultimately what we picked as a tool to measure the space was something called Wi-Fi sniffing. Wi-Fi sniffing allows you to capture the location of your phone. Anytime your phone is on, it's actually producing a signal, and we can triangulate your position if we have 3 sensors. So we created a waterproof patch, which has a battery pack, a Raspberry Pi, internal Wi-Fi receiver, and then a small piece of code that we wrote to do the triangulation. And these are the little packs, as you can see here. Again, in the toolkit that we created, we explained how to put these packs together so that anybody could build one themselves. And then we placed them in the plaza. Here is an example of one of them in the furniture that was created on site. So once this was installed, we could then triangulate the position of users walking through the sites or people interacting in the site itself. And that data went to an API server using the same Wi-Fi reception that was used in the sensors themselves. So here's an example of the API identifying each person moving through the space. So I want to get to data collection and privacy, because one of the things that was really important to us in this project is making sure not only that we maintain the privacy of those individuals that we were identifying through this triangulation method, but also that the visualizations that we created would maintain privacy. So we had looked at using video recording, and I can talk a bit about that. It is much more accurate than Wi-Fi sniffing, but ultimately we chose not to use it just because we were worried about having the images or having the imagery and the privacy of the people in those images itself. Ultimately, we had close to 4 million signals over the 5 days that we had our pop-up space open. And in fact, the pop-up space was so popular that MIT kept it until kept it until July 4th, where somebody actually reported them as a bomb, and it created a bomb scare. So that's like a whole other fun thing to talk about if you're interested. But we had these close to 4 million signals. In order to maintain data privacy, we aggregated those signals into a grid, and then deleted any one of the unique IP addresses coming from users. So the resulting data was a grid aggregating all of the people that were in this 1 meter square over the course of the day. The data visualization was then displayed right outside the plaza. So right when you enter the door to the plaza. And it explained that their information was being captured, but also allowed people to explore the use of the public space in general. So over the course of the week, we had a lot of interactions with the space. A lot of it was dependent, of course, on weather. We had a really nice weather day on Tuesday and then a bad one on Friday, and that's in the data set itself. And overall, the patterns over the course of the week increased activation in the public space itself. We have this available online if you want to check it out. It's at square9.mit.edu. But the pamphlet and toolkit is available for download online. So if this is something that you as a community want to do yourself, if you go to benchmark.mit.edu, we have both the drawings, the sensor toolkit, explanations on how to build the device, potential drawings for the benches themselves or other ways to do it, as well as included in it is open source code to develop the visualizations. And I should just take a minute to note that this project was funded through the Gell Institute and was really a way to think about how we could take some of the methods in their data design protocol to action. And I will stop here. I have a lot of projects that I would love to talk to you about in the lab, but I thought that this might bring a nice conversation between the ways that we can use technology to measure space itself. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I want to encourage all the attendees to use the Q&A function, which let me see if I can briefly share my own screen. If you are using the Zoom client, you'll find it down in the set of buttons at the bottom, right between, I guess, probably the list of participants and the chat button. And we will get those questions in front of our participants as soon as you send them in. While we're waiting for those, I would like to ask both Anya and Sarah, you know, both of these projects represent a pretty massive expansion in the amount of data gathered by designers about public spaces. And you both, I think, have taken pains to address the privacy concerns that arise around that. And I'm sure more will be done in the future. I guess my biggest question is, you know, we understand the downsides, we understand the technological capabilities. What did you learn that then maybe got fed back into the design process to alter or improve the design of the public space? And as a follow-up to that, do you envision this kind of measurement to be something that happens on an ongoing basis? Or is it a one-time thing that happens during like a design prototyping phase?
I can go, Anya.
Go ahead.
in our project, I think we thought of them really as like a one-time project to allow people who are developing pop-up spaces to evaluate them so that they're temporary measurement tools. I think like for a couple reasons, like one is that I'm not sure like the continuous measurement of public spaces, the kind of, let's say, surveillance that we want to have, but rather like what we're interested in more is improving the quality of the space. And so it's really taking some of those digital, some of those what were manual measurement tactics into, let's say, the digital realm. You had another a question that I've forgotten now. One was about, do you see them long term? Oh, how do you use them to change the space? So one of the things that we identified through the benchmark project, and if I had more time, I could talk a bit about it, but was just the types of furniture we used. We had created some, let's say, movable furniture that we thought would activate the space on the top of the plaza. But what we found is actually, let's say, the furniture that had the backs and allowed for, let's say, a different kind of longer term engagement in the space was more used. And so we went back and like redesigned the benches to kind of match up more with the types of things that people were interested in using in the space itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question of ongoing or one-time data collection is for us similar to Sarah, where it wasn't practical or desirable to have this be continuous. There were just limitations practically because we were working with, you know, a 15-foot pole that we were taking video from on a GoPro, and in New York, that's legal when it's in public space. You know, the same as if you were shooting video for, you know, a TV or whatever, you know, at that kind of level. And so we were kind of limited to sitting there by the actual collection device. And so we were just time limited. And also just data limited. We didn't have enough processing power to look at, you know, days and days worth of video. And so those were just limitations on the actual technical side of things for us. You know, I think if we had partnered with a university that had greater computing power, we probably could have gotten longer data sets, but ultimately it's kind of the same outcome. You don't want to do it for you know, a month, or, you know, I mean, what's the appropriate timeline to not have a sort of surveillance system going? You know, is it a year? Is it a day? Is it a month? You know, this kind of thing. I mean, we do have questions that we're trying to answer. Like I mentioned, the follow-up study that looks at evening occupation that's not captured by this kind of methodology. We have questions about, you know, what happens on you know, weekends, you know, these kind of shoulder times, different seasons. I mean, there's all sorts of questions about that just arise when you're not taking a data set over a long period of time. So we have to kind of do different distinct studies. So this really focuses on a noon hour, in the similar vein to White did, is looking at these kind of lunch hour crowds and who's coming out of not only office spaces like White was looking at, but you know, spaces around the city that aren't just servicing office workers. So it was really just a very sort of distinct set of time. And in terms of, oh, I should say, it's also difficult to replicate the study. You know, since then we've gotten clients that have said, oh, you know, this would be great to figure out on our site how people are moving, and it's just hard to replicate it over and over. But there are companies out there that are beginning to do this as a service, and they tend to mount, you know, videos on a pole, or, you know, sorry, cameras on a pole for no less than a month. So we wanted to do multiple sites in a brief period of time, and the consultants that do this tend to do it for one site in a longer period of time. So it's more suited to a client situation rather than a kind of design question. And in terms of feedback to design, I think, you know, the reason this is exciting for us is because we can feed back into actual designs. And we've been working with the New York office to implement some of these takeaways, actually in a project in Russia, but also in New York. And so there is a feedback, but just because of the way our projects work, it's a, you know, it's a kind of 4-year timeline. So this study was done in 2018. So we won't see the effects of this until the project is designed, built, opened, you know, so it's a little bit, you know, we have a little bit to go on this, but we really wanted to have these kind of 25 takeaways so that we didn't, it wasn't so much a snapshot in time, like this is exactly how New Yorkers use these public spaces at this one time in June. Although it was that kind of snapshot, we wanted to generalize and say, okay, across these various sites, we've seen this type of behavior. And so having it be these kind of tenets about how people use public spaces made it a little bit more translatable. And again, you know, this doesn't translate into a lot of the places that we design, like arid places, deserts, places with extreme heat fluctuation. I mean, but it does transfer to places with temperate climate, with 4 seasons, you know, with deciduous vegetation, more or less. So it does have a lot of translatability to other sites, and especially the scale of the site. But I am excited to share the feedback into design once those sites are built and going. We hope to revisit them and understand how those interventions actually worked out.
One of our participants, Elena Brescia, pointed out that she thinks it's interesting to consider such data gathering for post-occupancy assessments for projects. I wanted to bring Noel back into the conversation. We had another question from Stephanie Chalou, which was on my mind as well. You know, thinking about how community input can be incorporated into development, design, evaluation of these kinds of projects. You know, part of the theme of the whole conference is exploring scales, and I think one of the things that Beta NYC's work really highlights is how something like open data, which really has global scale, right? It's pushing information out over the web and using scale in a new way to have impact there. But then to actually have impact, you have to go one-on-one and do the training with people in order to make it work. I'm wondering, Noel, if you have thoughts or reactions, particularly given how active you've been with Open Streets this summer, whether you have any insights on that.
Yeah, I love the examples that Sarah and Anya have provided. I want to illuminate one of the conversations that Beta NYC is a part of. We're part of the technical advisory team, and I believe that some of you are also for the Brooklyn Greenway Initiative. And there's a company called Numina that creates kind of one of the devices that Anya elaborated. And there's a longer term study that's now being done for the Brooklyn Greenway to kind of address some of these issues. Numina has created a device that does what Sarah has also talked about, which ensures privacy, but now it's doing a longitudinal study along this 28-mile pedestrian bicycle kind of like green space connector. And one of the initial questions that they have as they're expanding kind of this first level of surveillance is like, what are the issues that we need to be concerned about on this 28-mile strip? You know, where can we study equity and inequity and different types of interaction? You know, Robert Moses did a lot of injustice in New York City and as we have slowly clawed back the industrial history on the Brooklyn waterfront, it really has created a segregated system So now we have rich people who are living on the waterfront who are essentially paying for public space, but then that public space is then separated by the BQE, which essentially creates no-go zones or kind of like has segregated various communities. So I'm looking forward to the longer term study that the Brooklyn Greenway Initiative is putting together to really think about, how do you use these particular tools to engage community actors to start thinking about, now that we have expressed the Greenway, now that we have the momentum of the Greenway, what comes next? What is the infrastructure developments that need to be put in place along the Greenway that really activates it for all neighborhoods that are connected to it, and how can we address some of these systemic long-term racist practices that have been baked into our urban environment to give us equity and to give us opportunity and give us access back to the public realm. So when it comes down to like getting people involved in this decision-making process, in North Brooklyn, I attend community board meetings, and you inevitably get that person who's like, my family's been here 5 generations. And once again, I know what's better for the community than anyone else because, I've lived here. We were recently, we as in the North Brooklyn Open Streets Community Coalition, were on a call with the Department of Transportation, and the DOT was frank, and they said, you really have to organize kind of these contingencies to act as counterpowers to the longer term legacy of the neighbors and the institutional power that other residents have created. And that intersects with the lead-in to what we're talking about is we got to get elected officials who are willing to listen to other individuals and willing to be diplomatic and in their engagement with community members. There is a place and a space for all community members to say what they need to say, as long as it's constructive. If it's deconstructive, it's reductionist, if it's racist, if it's sexist, frankly, like, why do we want to listen to those people? I think examples from Barcelona and the super block implementation, even with some of the open street stuff that's done here in New York City, it's that the city said, there has been an injustice. We are going to make a tactical intervention. We're going to open up the streets for something other than cars. And now we're going to ask, how do we program those spaces? And so, to me, it's not including the community voices in like, should we do this? It's about having the political power and the institutional willingness to make the change and then ask, how do we improve those spaces?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make a connection to Noel's work also in terms of like the way that we were thinking about the project is that we were making it really DIY so that the community could also use it as a learning tool and a digital learning tool, and that's so that they could engage in the conversation. So I think a lot of times, like when we use data to make decisions, the community doesn't have access to that data or doesn't know how to use it or doesn't have control over it. So part of the idea of the benchmark project was to make something that could be, let's say, a learning tool for the community that's doing a pop-up space or working on a greenway or trying to measure, let's say, like a dining, and that through the process of collecting the data, they also learn about data, and it empowers them to like think about how they can use it to make decisions. So it was very much made for, like, let's say, like community planner, the community organizer. And I forgot to mention that we, like when we partnered with Gail, we partnered on a number of different projects where we did this in pop-up public spaces that are community driven themselves. So not just like Gail projects, but like different kinds of placemaking projects where the community was really leading them on a lower budget. And so that I think that like one way like that and this gets back to the, again, what you were saying, it's like connecting, like we need the community to learn about data, to be empowered, but also like, how do we deal with the data privacy issues? And it's like by giving them control over the information also is a way to bring in that dialogue.
Can I just say thank you for doing open source work, and thank you for all participants and attendees who do open source work. It is critical that we ensure that the tools that we're making are open and flexible and can be iterative. And we can never we should not forget that open source exists, and try to work to improve the commons. You know, and to that end, making sure that the data that we do create in some of these projects get back into OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap has turned into kind of like the central repository where we can do collective urban analytics here in New York City. So I just want to say thank you. You know, like not everybody can afford private tools. And so thanks for doing that open source work. It's really important.
Yeah, and I'll also say, like, I was thinking about while you're talking is like, I mean, part of the reason we didn't go with the images for this is because of the processing that it needed that Anya mentioned, right? And that we wouldn't, a DIY product for community would not be able to handle that kind of image processing. And so that's why we tried to create like a different measurement tool. I would say the image processing is a lot more accurate, like extremely more accurate, because you have an image, you can capture a person, I mean, in real time. The Wi-Fi sniffing is only if somebody's got a phone on them. And so there's, you know, you are missing counts, so it's giving you more of an estimate. But it's something to think about, right? Like, so like Numina, as you mentioned, Noel, right? Like, you know, they can do that image processing for communities because they have those servers to do that.
I think it's fascinating, you know, in a conference about scale that the way we're thinking about scale primarily here is in scale of computational power rather than spatial scale. But I did want to zero in on that and ask all of you, you know, how your work in these projects have changed how you think about scale in the city, whether it has revealed smaller details that you couldn't see before or larger patterns that weren't apparent before you did this work. Why don't we start with you, Sarah, since your mic is on?
Okay, I just spoke. Well, I would, you know, one of the things I've always thought as a designer is that, you know, we you know, haven't had data at this scale to work with as a designer previously. And now we are just getting that kind of data. And how do we use it to influence design is something that we're still very much experimenting with. And I would say that data still doesn't, let's say, typically exist at the scale of the site, right? We have a scale of the block or maybe the street, but the site has always been a challenge for us as designers. And so I think what's interesting as we move forward is that we do now have the ability ourselves as designers to capture that data pretty easily and to make those, let's say, like smaller scale measurements on site. Let Anya take it.
Anya, do you have any thoughts on this question?
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, like Elena brought this up in terms of post-occupancy. It's something that, you know, it's a really basic level of research that firms should be doing on their own work. You know, we designed it, it got built, did it work? Did it work according to our intentions? Did it not? It's something that every designer wants to know. And I think having real data instead of saying, you know, I imagine that this will attract families and young kids and a diverse coalition and, you know, this kind of rainbow of people in, you know, wheelchairs and able-bodied people. You know, it's actually saying like, oh, actually this is a problem for this group of people, or this is a barrier or impediment. Like, let's try on the next project to remove that or design something else. I think there's a kind of low amount of feedback in terms of improving design work through post-occupancy, and it's just there isn't a good channel to do it. And that's partially why we do practice-based research. It's difficult to do, but the scale of our firm allows us to do it. And, you know, I think data at the site level is hard to get. It's incredibly time intensive if you're going to do everything manually. You know, you either have to get groups of students or partner with somebody who's interested in sitting out on the site and tabulating, you know, and to do kind of an analog pass at things. I would say that like one thing that was interesting in terms of scale with this study was that because we were doing it in perspective, right? So it would have been much more effective to do things overhead. So we could have run the same algorithm on drone footage, but in New York, you can't fly drones just because there's too many airports, right? So, and it was too time intensive for us to go up and ask for permission for, you know, in these tall buildings, like, can we go out of your, you know, 5th floor window at this person's desk? You know, it's just, it's too logistically complicated to do that for 10 sites. So we ended up doing it, you know, 15 feet off the ground in perspective. And one thing that was interesting is that I think as a designer, you think of the site as bounded, right? And there's been a whole undoing in education to try to think beyond the site, right? This is what you're contracted to design, and this is what you have to think about in the whole context. But in this sense, it was interesting because you're shooting in perspective, you actually get a lot of noise in your data from beyond the site, right? So there's actually no way to, let's say, mask, or at least we didn't find an effective way to mask out kind of the site when we were in perspective. So we actually had to discard a lot of the automated counting that it was doing because it would get people passing on the street, right? There's a lot of sidewalk, and that's what you want as a designer. You want a lot of enlivened context around the site. But actually that was kind of a bit of an impediment because we couldn't isolate what was happening within the site. It was getting stuff across the street. It was, you know, looking at, you know, buses that were going by, you know, cyclists that were on the street, that kind of stuff.
If your counting algorithm fails, that means your design has succeeded.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So I think that was just a bit of an interesting thing in a related, this is not exactly related to scale, but in a similar sense, there was a lot of obscuring from trees, right? You want, in your design, you want a lot of vegetation, you want shade, you want a pleasant kind of microclimate. And actually that was an impediment to, you know, capturing the data that you want, which is people, right? Because there are a lot of people sitting under a tree or passing under a tree, especially out on these big, hot, you know, expanses of paved area. And so we couldn't get accurate counts there either because you have a lot of you know, obscuring from these design elements that you actually want. So I think those are just interesting things that we wouldn't have learned unless we were actually doing the project, and we're learning about, okay, how does this algorithm see things, and what are we feeding it? How can we feed something that would create something more accurate?
What it makes you realize that the algorithm is really site specific, as you mentioned before, right? Because like you can't apply image processing machine learning algorithm to sites like everywhere, which is something like we also are thinking about with this Wi-Fi sniffing, which still kind of works with its errors. When you don't, but image processing has like those problems because you have to train every site that you're working on. Yeah. So it's a retraining of images, a retraining of the data based on the shade. So
yeah, and that took a good amount of time. And we worked with, I don't know if I mentioned this, but we worked with a data scientist to do, you know, 10 trainings for 10 sites. And luckily there's a similar amount of components, but yeah, every set is different because you're feeding it what looks like a mess, you know, to the algorithm. So you have to kind of.
But I think it's an interesting question if we get back to this time thing. I don't know if Anthony, you have another question, but
Yeah,
I know
please
that
take it.
I mean, I know that like, you know, Sidewalk Labs was really interested in putting these kinds of sensors up for a much longer period, almost permanent period of time. And I do think it's really important that we ask ourselves, like, what is the amount of time that we want to surveil public space, and like, what do we want to accomplish with that? I do worry, like that's why, like, I was thinking like what we wanted to make is something that feels temporary, that is for a particular project, but then, you know, how do we use that data when it becomes a permanent thing, which was, I think, and how do we explain the privacy issues when it becomes a permanent feature, I think is a question I don't know that anybody knows how to answer, not even Sidewalk Labs, who had a lot of problems with it. But how do we, now that we have these technologies and they're at their fingertips, how do we use them in a way that is equitable?
So I want to say and highlight something that I thought was very important that Anya and Sarah just alluded to. One is that so many algorithms have biases baked into them. And you know, like fundamentally, if we're not you know, thoroughly interrogating the algorithms that we're either being sold or that we're downloading, you know, we're blindly marshaling into, you know, realms where biases are not considered and not accounted for. And that's something that, you know, we've discovered within our work, is that so much of the data that the city's data is actually biased for people who, you know, are privileged in one way or another. There are missing people within, you know, every single municipal data set. And then even some data sets oversample and kind of put the onus on people who are living in or near poverty to put more and more of their information online, so that way we have to see them. And they pop up, and then all of a sudden we're oversampling some communities. And so bias really just pops up throughout the whole spectrum of the data collection, the data interrogation, and the analytics process. And that's something that I didn't realize, just how biased, you know, like how many biases show up across the whole spectrum of things. And the other thing that I thought was, that Anya pointed out, is just this is the work that you do, even when you do like automated data collection, has a very detailed human element to them. You know, like while we would like to think that they're sophisticated and that we're living in a Star Trek future, like so much of the stuff is bespoke. It is and does require manual, detailed labor to put it in there. And I think the more that we look at our analytics processes, the more we start to overcount and make sure that we transmit the fact that, oh, this is going to take us time to really go through and analyze all of these different things.
I often,
so
whenever I hear people use the metaphor that data is the new oil, I have two responses. One is, often in public sector contexts, it's more like toxic waste. But even if it is oil, like the amount of engineering know-how that has to be applied to oil to get anything useful out of it is just astonishing. And it took us, you know, 50 to 100 years to develop all of that. And so, yeah, if you want to use that metaphor, you've got to appreciate, you know, what you're saying, Noel, which is that, like, it's got to get distilled into valuable things, and you make a lot of choices when you distill it about what comes out the other end. We had another question, Noel, for you specifically, from an anonymous attendee, which was asking about Link NYC, getting back to, I think, the data harvesting by Wi-Fi. Maybe you can shed some light on this. Do the Link NYC kiosks capture data of those who use its wireless when they're passing by? Is that data sold by owners? Isn't this a privacy issue? And you know, I guess, you know, is that something that's disclosed to people? So I guess, in the case of less ethical actors, are we being tracked around the city, and where does that data go? Is this
So, yeah, this is actually a really complicated answer. We're fortunate that Link NYC has accountability to New York City government. Link NYC is based off of and built on the old copper network inside of that New York City government owns. So the city's Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications has oversight of the Link NYC rollout, which means that as citizens and as residents, we have the ability to call Link NYC into question when they weren't publishing their privacy policies. And so when Link NYC first launched, it was not clear, you could not find their privacy policy on their website. It was on the kiosk, it was on if you connected to the Wi-Fi device, but you couldn't find it on the website. And then once we started reading through the privacy policy, it was not in the shape that really protected all of its users. And so the privacy policy is now put in place, it's public. Link NYC does do anonymization, but the problem with Link NYC is that we gave up our copper network, and we didn't want to pay for the public infrastructure. So we've essentially leased it out to a private for-profit advertising company that is essentially revenue generating through advertisements based upon your demographic information when you walk by, if that makes any sense. So we are ultimately paying for Link NYC through our tax dollars and through the surveillance that these devices are performing. And so, is it right? I don't know. I don't think, how I would answer it is that I don't think it's appropriate. The city should have rolled out an infrastructure based off of hard work that communities have been doing in the past and created a mesh network that would have ultimately given everybody access and not put this into corporate hands. But the same technology that's rolled into Link NYC is actually the same thing that Starbucks and other corporate entities use to provide network access at chain stores. So every time you're walking by a Starbucks, the same tech that's doing Mac sniffing is in that Starbucks, Jamba Juice, or any of these other places. Like we need broadly very clear privacy laws that make it understood where you're being surveilled. And I think that this is the next fight of the 21st century, is that when you're walking on the sidewalk, there's a clear line that says if you're entering this zone, that you're being monitored by these various corporations. Our cell phone data is already being sold. I'm here at home. Every time I click on a URL, my internet provider is taking a look at that and reselling that information. It is not clear how much corporate surveillance is on all of our network connections. Sometimes we get notified that we can opt out, but very rarely do we get that. So I wouldn't just single out Link NYC and some of its practices. I think this is a much broader conversation and is a policy and litigious argument that has to be fought.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly worth noting that a lot of the kinds of surveillance in public spaces that we've seen here that are being done, in much more ethically rigorous ways for a public purpose. These techniques and technologies were pioneered in retailing like a decade ago and are pretty widespread now. If you're in an airport, a shopping mall, a hotel, Rockefeller Center, at Christmas time, you're getting put on a map, that's pretty similar to what we saw before. And there is almost no restriction on how that data is cross-referenced to you as an individual as an individually identifiable person who has a purchase history, a voting record, you know, all kinds of things like that. That's almost totally unregulated activity. There's one last question.
Do you mind if I just, sorry, do you mind if I just jump in?
Please.
About the, I think that just in terms of what Sarah said and what Noel
Yes.
said about, you know, these kind of, the privacy issues, the ethics of the data, I think one thing that we're seeing, you know, we're concerned with public space. We're concerned with outside, you know, parks, plazas, streets, all these kinds of things. And I think that we've come to expect, like you said, Anthony, that, you know, your shopping data, when you're inside a Starbucks, that if you log on, I think it's beginning to be more recognized that you're selling your data, or you're allowing your data to be sold in exchange for that Wi-Fi connection, right? But I think the part that we see as really troubling is that that's leaking out into spaces that have traditionally been, you know, I guess unsold spaces. So like, for instance, Bryant Park is managed by the, you know, business improvement district there, and incredibly mixed, I would say, you know, the mixed messaging about what's happening there. You know, you're there for, you know, a film, you're there for a concert, you're there for lunch. You might not engage in any commercial activity whatsoever, and everything's being harvested, whether you log on or not. And so I think that the stuff that's leaking out into exterior spaces becomes a real problem, because this is public space as we understand it, right? As we traditionally have understand streets and plazas and things like that. And the fact that there's a blurring between, you know, what we can understand as we open a door to Starbucks and when we enter a park is now data-wise sometimes the same. And so I think having there be a little bit more clarity, right, about when your image can be captured, for what purpose. You know, in some ways, being in the public sphere is more permissive. That's what allowed us to shoot our video, right? Instead of, you know, being able to set up in a mall, for instance, you have to get different permissions to do something like that. But I think, you know, there's a lot of privacy issues when you're dealing with entities that we've sort of now handed over public space to, like business improvement districts, developers. They're not always clear. For instance, like we shot in Hearst Plaza in Lincoln Center, and although it's completely public and porous and people are coming in and out, we had different restrictions to, you know, take video footage there than we did anywhere else, because it's private campus. And so I think, I don't know if it's, like Noel said, if it's a distinct line that says this is public, this is private, this is different rules. But I think there, at least we're seeing that there's a kind of disarray to this entrance of data into the public and outdoor sphere, at least.
Well, thanks for clarifying that. I think we're going to have to probably leave it there. I'm not sure, am I going to be handing it off at 3 o'clock? Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to thank everybody for coming. This has been a really fascinating discussion. I'm going to thank all three of our panelists, Noel, Anya, and Sarah, for their time and their insights and sharing all the great work that they're doing. You can go back through the chat session. There's links to many of the resources that they shared. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Great chatting with you guys, and thanks for convening us, Anthony. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Use data for action. Get my book.
Yeah. That was wonderful. Anthony, thank you for moderating that great session, and Noel, Anya, and Sarah for sharing your wonderful work and expertise. It was just, I mean, kind of mind-blowing, actually. As a designer myself, you know, I think we kind of now know how to start a new project. We know that there's data available at our fingertips. We have to understand how to analyze it. We know how to better how to assess a space in its current iteration, and then also potentially some tools for post-occupancy analysis. So Sarah, something you said, data for action. I think that, you know, hopefully we can all take that and use that as we move forward. So wonderful session. Thank you so much. We're at a point where we're going to take a 15-minute break, or maybe a little bit less than 15 minutes, for our final session of the conference, which is taking a look at the future of the professions. And we have some great speakers lined up. So please go take a bathroom break, get some water, do whatever you need to do, and meet us back here in about 15 minutes. So we'll see you shortly. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for being here with us throughout this afternoon for the conference. As you know, we are coming up to our final session for the event. Yesterday, we heard about public health, we heard about transportation. We just concluded a wonderful panel discussion about technology. And now our final panel discussion is an excellent panel of speakers that have a rather large topic to tackle, which is the role of each profession at all scales. It'll be really wonderful to hear what our speakers have to say. Before I introduce our moderator for the final session, I just want to remind everyone that we have a happy hour networking session at the end of this session, which will be at 5 p.m. and we invite all attendees and speakers to join us. This will be an opportunity where we can all be on screen and to talk with one another and discuss what we've all heard throughout the proceedings of the conference. So there will be a separate Zoom link provided in the chat. This will be a meeting where everybody can be on screen. So please look out for that. I hope you will join us to discuss. And with that, I want to introduce Sean Scott. Sean is a wonderful member of the planning committee for this event, and he's also a really wonderful urban designer with a passion for creating interesting, responsive, and inclusive urban spaces. His mission is to promote and work for a more representative and diverse profession in which the perspectives of the communities we serve as designers and planners is honored and promoted. Sean works for WSP in the Urban Design and Placemaking Group, where he works through an equity lens to imagine a more just and inclusive community by leveraging transit investments across the country. Sean is a proud member of the APA New York Metro Chapter's Diversity Committee, with whom he helps organize professional development events such as this event, as well as the Hindsight Conference. He holds a bachelor's in urban studies from Brown University and a master's in city and regional planning from the University of Pennsylvania. So please join me in welcoming Sean.
Thank you, Annie, for a very great introduction, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. Thank you to all the folks who joined yesterday and today, and all of the panelists so far that we've listened to. I found all the conversations extremely engaging. Even as I helped pull the conference together, it's been really eye-opening and I think very topical, a lot of the points that were made by our panelists. As Annie mentioned, my name is Sean Scott. I'm an urban designer, and I'll be moderating this session. And so I just want to briefly kind of introduce briefly review some of the points that were made over the past 2 days, and some of the points that were made, as we're all living through a global pandemic that has upended our lives in numerous and palpable ways. Communities and cities across the country are rising up against racial injustice, and we as design professionals have to reckon with the impact of these ongoing crises, things that we've had a role in building our suburban, rural, urban environments, and thinking about the ways that we can take what we're learning and take all of our expertise and begin to enact positive change that hasn't been seen and change that needs to be seen. I'm just kind of, like I mentioned, walk through some of the ideas that were shared over the past couple days. Our day one keynote, Ifoma Ibo, invited us to envision a more thoughtful city and more thoughtful cities that are founded on an abundance of caring and concern, to envision and co-create to transform our social, economic, and emotional environments through practice. We had panelists in the first session speak about public health and its importance and the way in which COVID-19, the communities that have been hit hardest, particularly in New York, hardest and earliest, that experience greater health and economic disparities, aren't biologically predestined to experience these issues. A lot of the issues that we're seeing and the impacts of COVID that we're seeing are a result of practice of policy, particularly policy that pertains to the built environment and how folks live, experience, and move through our cities and communities. We had folks speak to transit and transit's criticality, and how we're seeing less and less people use transit due to the pandemic, though we recognize how critical it is for folks to be able to get to and from places, and also how critical transit still is for our most essential workers, and how can we innovate upon the transit services we provide? How can we integrate it better with our built environment, with our communities, and ensure folks not only have access, but it's useful access? And today we heard Jumani Williams speak to the responsibility we have in constructing, designing our cities, the need to grow with community and build better, the need to work at various scales, citywide, neighborhood-wide. You know, we just had a conversation in the tech session about working at the site scale and how that's important as well, and really underscoring the need to be contextual in how we practice. And just to speak a little bit to the session that was just made, a point that I found extremely fascinating, and that I think our panelists for this session with some of their work can speak to as well, is the idea that, you know, public spaces aren't really public because our data is being harvested and collected when we enter these spaces and then being sold, you know, blurring the lines. You know, digital, we don't see unless we have a screen in front of us. And so kind of reckoning with as we make our cities smarter, as we leverage technology, you know, in our day-to-day lives and in our practice, how can we reset the notion of smart cities and put it on a more efficient and ethical path, utilize it better, and therefore better respond to the needs of each other and our communities. And so with all that in mind, I want to invite everybody on this call, and particularly the speakers of this session, to think about the ongoing uncertainty we're facing as individuals, but also in our practice, and what our role as landscape architects, designers, practitioners of every shape and form who deal with the built environment, but might not necessarily identify as a planner or a designer. You know, think about, as our society changes at a rapid pace, as we face these uncertain times, you know, what is our role? You know, are we, you know, are we just here to, you know, do the technical work? You know, and I think a lot of people would say we're here to do much more than that. But we're having, you know, the inequities in our society laid bare, from housing quality, transit, as I mentioned, you know, looking at, you know, who's most essential to our cities, and we're finding it's often those who are least well off, who really serve to make the city operate for all of us. You know, the digital divide, we're lucky that we can be on Zoom having these conversations when we have students and families across the city, you know, struggling with access to internet to be able to do their homework, you know. And then also, we're seeing how critical it is to have good quality open space, green space, and recreational space. As Noah mentioned in the last session, in New York City, the Open Streets program was just made permanent and extended year-round, which is great. But you know, can we do more than that? Do we need to do more than that? And then, you know, and then thinking of all of those issues, you know, how are we equipped to tackle these issues? I think a lot of us really value being at the community scale, engaging with folks, but our professions have a history of being top down. How, you know, do we need to invert that? I would say yes, but is there value? How can we transform how we practice top down, but also bottom up? And it's not just about how we practice, but maybe how we look to affect change, be it, city agencies or state agencies, federal, how are we working across those scales of governance? How can we use our work to lead the way and empower and support each other in our communities? And how can we challenge our elected officials and hold them accountable through our practice to envision more inclusive, more equitable, more healthy, more sustainable communities through the work that we do? So with that lead in, I'd like to just introduce our three panelists today. Nisha Baliga, Deborah Martin, and Jeff Howe. Nisha is co-executive director of Hester Street, where she's played a critical role in supporting the organization's rapid growth and impact through projects in New York City and beyond. She's led multiple large-scale projects involving infrastructure, resiliency, arts and culture, health and wellness, open space and urban planning for public and private entities. And she oversees Hester Street's planning and capacity building portfolio. And she'll say more soon. Deborah Martin is the executive director of the Van Allen Institute and has experience working with municipal leaders and neighborhood change agents to empower communities of need by unlocking the potential of space. She previously worked with the New York Restoration Project, with whom she helped plant 250,000 trees as a partner in New York City's Million Trees NYC initiative, among other great projects and initiatives. And Jeff Howe is a professor of landscape architecture at the University of Washington, Seattle, and director of the Urban Commons Lab there, where his work focuses on public space, democracy, and civic engagement. In a career that spans the Pacific, he has worked with indigenous tribes, farmers, and fishers in Taiwan, neighborhood residents in Japan, villagers in China, and inner city immigrant youths and elders in North American cities. Thank you three for being here. A quick shout out to Jeff. He's currently 12 hours ahead of us here on the East Coast in Taipei. So thank you for being here at 3 a.m. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Nisha to share her screen and tell us a little bit more about her work at a more local scale.
Right, thank you, Sean. I'm about to share my screen. It's really great to be here with everyone. And I acutely realize that sort of our panel is what's holding you back, or is between you and the happy hour. So this is a special spot. And I'm really impressed also with Jeff that he is awake at this hour. So it's really great to have you here. It's an honor to be part of this discussion and share the space with my colleagues and all of you. As Sean said, I'm the co-executive director of Hester Street. I'm a planner. I'm an immigrant from India, and I call Brooklyn home. I'm also 7 months into pandemic parenting. So please excuse me if some things happen in the background that I tried really hard to plan for. So with that, let me just get started. A little bit about Hester Street. So our mission, Hester Street's mission is to ensure that cities are shaped by the people who live in them. We devote urban planning, design, and development expertise to support community-led change. We create and facilitate deeply democratic planning and policymaking to advance racial and economic justice. And we are a proudly women-led, majority women, majority BIPOC organization. Our offices are on Hester Street, but we work in New York City, all across New York State and the nation. And our three areas of work are capacity building, planning and design, and community development. Our partners and clients include governments, civic institutions, and community-based organizations. So I really love the theme of this conference because it speaks to how we really approach our work at Hester Street. Over the last 2 decades of our organization, we've always worked at a variety of scales, or at least in the last 6 years, we've been working at a variety of scales and geographies, because we truly recognize that our cities and our neighborhoods are complex ecosystems that really require looking through the lens of different scales and disciplines, from the unit of the neighborhood to the city, the country, and the world. We work on both built environment issues as well as social infrastructure because we see how closely they're intertwined. And we also know that while change can be imagined and fostered at the local level, and it often is, sort of deep systemic shifts really require looking at how the local interacts with the city, state, and federal level and beyond. So a little bit about how we work. staff consists of urban planners, architects, community developers, community organizers, public health professionals, and very recently a lawyer. We really believe in that interdisciplinary approach to our work. And our staff uses design, visualization, and place-based data to demonstrate and inform solutions for neighborhoods, cities, and systems. We always center low-income communities and communities of color to tell their own stories and advance their priorities. Community engagement is a thread that goes through all our projects. And we always partner with community-based organizations to build on existing social networks and local institutions. And one thing we really believe when we talk about community engagement is that it's not a show. It's not a photo op. It's not a box to check. This is something, as we do community engagement, it really needs to be beyond hosting a meeting and say you hosted a meeting, but really thinking about how you're shifting and sharing power. So these are some of the community engagement principles that we use and to both design and drive our work, so that we design processes that are equitable, that are just, inclusive, accessible, and accountable. And these are some of the things that, the keynote speaker, Foma, spoke about. You probably heard it over. And I think in this moment, sort of the two top, the equitable one and the accountable one are particularly important, because to us, having a meeting and calling people to the table is not enough. You have to sort of be like transparent about who's making decisions, how the information is used, and how decision makers will report back and be accountable to the communities that they have asked for the input from. So this is something that's really central to our approach. And I just want to spend a little time now talking about, this moment. Just like many of you, Hester Street has been responding to the COVID-19 crisis and this moment in our country around uprisings for racial justice. So in the wake of the pandemic and these sort of these deep-seated recent and historic travesties of racial injustice and police killings and systemic racism, we feel that now is the time for all of us to radically rethink the neighborhoods, the city, the nation that we all want to live in. And we know that this work starts and ends with the people most impacted by the everyday violence of disinvestment, disparity, and oppression. So over the past few months, in addition to the projects that we had pre-pandemic, we've been really working with our partners to support community-led change through efforts that really focus on them now and emphasize just recovery, community control, and democratizing data. And so I'm just going to talk about a few of these projects, and you'll really see that how we talk, how they embody this theme of the conference about acting at all scales. So the first one is about a survey we did in the early days of the pandemic. So, in the early days of the pandemic, March, April, what we found and what we were seeing was a lot of data on the disaggregated data on the impact of COVID, the number of deaths, the number of hospitalizations, the number of people who tested positive. But at that time, there was very little information on the specific impacts of the COVID crisis on Black and Brown New Yorkers. So we worked very closely in April and May with our partners at Make the Road New York, which is the largest immigrant rights organization in New York City, to sort of fill out the gap and get information and data directly from communities that were most hard hit. And in their own words. So we did a survey, both quantitative and qualitative, of over 300 New Yorkers to really understand the true impacts of COVID on their lives. The findings of this work were devastating, but they were really important to tell. We found that over 88% of the folks we interviewed had lost their jobs due to the pandemic. Only 5% had received any unemployment benefits, and only 15% had received any kind of government assistance at all. And so, we were able to use this data and this report to really tell the story of the impact on this community, and all this information fed into advocacy efforts for rent relief, eviction moratorium, and an excluded workers emergency fund, both at the city and the statewide level. The other thing we've been working on is on businesses. We all know that the pandemic has been devastating for small businesses, but we know that it's been even more devastating for Black-owned businesses. They are disproportionately impacted by the crisis due to historic discriminatory lending processes that have left them underfunded. They're less likely to secure bank loans, and they're more likely to be left out of government aid. And on top of that, while 23% of New Yorkers are Black, there's only 3% of New York businesses that are Black owned. So these businesses are really important and precious to protect. So we've been working since March with a really dynamic coalition of led by Black leaders and Black tech entrepreneurs to create a Together We Thrive Black Business Coalition. And we're raising hundreds of millions of dollars in loans and grants to bring back more than 40% of these Black-owned businesses that have shuttered during the pandemic or were really suffering. But we know that just capital is not, while it's really critical, you need that infusion of cash, you need those loans, you need those grants, it's just not enough to really ensure that Black businesses survive, but also thrive. So our coalition has embedded an inclusive economy approach that really builds out a network of culturally competent technical assistants that is built on an understanding of the lived experience of Black-owned businesses and their unique worldview and their experience. It'll develop peer mentoring support and encourage cooperative structures, collective efforts at the neighborhood level. And we'll be launching this initiative in more depth in the fall. The other thing that we did is sort of following the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor murders and all the other travesties that we saw. We know there was a groundswell and a national rallying cry to do things such as defund the police, to reimagine public safety, to really rethink how our cities, our federal government, and our states fund public safety and all the sort of infrastructure that supports life in this country. And while we were taking all of that in, what we were not seeing was that much of a focus on how we get there. How do we change policy? And we knew, and as Sean said, the traditional top-down planning and policy making has really led to the systems that undermine equity and deny justice. They've been created by design. And so as we reimagine places where we can all thrive, we really need to recognize that the people most impacted by systemic racism and police violence must lead the way. So what we did is we created a framework. We created a top-down policy and planning guide that serves as a framework, an alternative. It provides clear directions about who, how, and what you need for policy and planning by and for the people. And this is sort of intended for public officials, planners, and activists, both in New York City, but beyond, to just say how you get to those decisions matters, process matters. So that's something we did a couple of months ago. And then finally, one thing we've been really working on over the last few months, actually for almost a year now, is the census. As we know, the census really dictates the number of congressional seats New York will get and determines the amount of federal funding that will flow into the city. New York City has up to $6 billion of census-guided funding. And 10 years ago, only 62% of New York City households self-responded to the census, compared to almost 80% or 76% nationally. And that difference has meant that billions of dollars of aid and very critical funding has been left at the table and not come into New York City. So a complete count and a deep count, especially in this moment, was really critical. And so we've been working for almost a year to build tools and outreach strategies to increase the count and support community-based organizations who know their communities well, to be part of the citywide mobilization effort. So as part of that, we created an interactive digital tool that served as a resource for community-based organizations. So they could have access to information, community assets, languages spoken at the community district level, at the sort of census tract level, to really target and make their outreach efforts more effective. And then, when COVID hit, we were in the heat of sort of in the thick of all of these things, and we need to move these organizing efforts online really quickly. So our team pivoted to host citywide convenings that were really initially planned to be in person in the Zoom space. And these convenings focus both on census outreach as well as the difficulties of reaching communities during these particular pandemic conditions when people were really struggling with the basics. So we hosted 5 convenings over the summer where over 80 citywide and really local organizations participated and sat around the virtual table to learn from one another and brainstorm best outreach practices. It was a really generative space so people could learn and listen to each other and collectively figure out what the gaps and overlaps were. They could use real-time data to share where they should focus their efforts and strategies. And we've really been happy to see that, you know, this effort, along with so many of you might have been involved in, has increased New York City's count above Chicago. We still have a way to go, and we just heard some encouraging news today that the September 30th deadline could be pushed to October 30th. So fingers crossed. And while we've been doing it, you know, we've been trying to have some fun as well. So our staff was part of a citywide competition to create census posters, and they actually won. Shout out to Cardi B, our Cardi B poster. We hope you'll see these throughout the city. They're going to be part of a citywide campaign. We also worked to really create targeted messaging for different constituencies. So the slide on the right is focused on NYCHA residents. We did some for seniors. We did some for African-American communities, African diaspora. So we really, you know, we recognize the census outreach really needed to be targeted at a citywide level to communities in the language that they speak and in the way that the filling out the census would be meaningful for them, because they could make a connection between filling out the census and how it would impact their life. So that's a little bit of some of the projects we've been doing in COVID-19 and sort of in the sort of rise of the wake of the BLM uprisings. I just wanted to end on something that we as an organization have really been drawing strength from and sort of centering in this moment. We feel now more than ever as professionals, as individuals, our values need to lead our work and sort of help us focus on some really deep and hard work that we all have as in the urban planning design profession to think about how we can make the world more equitable and advance racial justice. So this is the values that drive our work. We've collected these and distilled these from our staff. And this sort of is something that is our North Star as we do this work. Equity is a driving force. Our work is focused on the communities that have been systematically excluded from power and possibility. This also echoes what Ifoma said, abundance. We believe that this is not a zero-sum game. Just because someone gets more does not mean someone gets less. There are riches and knowledge and freedom for everyone. We believe that collaboration is so important because the best work comes when we are led by and learn from those most impacted by injustice. Collectivity in this moment, in this time, no individual can make change on their own. Our liberation is bound up together and we are all responsible for each other. And then courage. This is a hard time and this has been a hard time. And so we really believe that we are brave. We go into this work, we are brave, we're not perfect. We know we will fail, but we will try again. But this moment, this time really demands action. So with that, thank you. Look forward to hearing what the other panelists have to say and the conversation.
Thank you so much, Nisha. Values leading our work, I think, is one of the more salient threads that I've been hearing from your presentation today, as well as throughout the conference. And really love how your organization, you leverage all your expertise and give it to those in the community and empower them to kind of do it their way. And I think that's so important, particularly when we think about the neighborhood scale, but also how it relates all the way up. The census is a perfect example of that. You start locally in our cities and then move all the way up. So thank you for that. Next up, I'd like to invite Deborah Martin to share their screen, unmute, and come on video.
There I am.
Perfect.
Oh my God, Nisha, it seems like you must have a staff of like 100 people to do all that. That was a very humbling presentation. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So Sean and all of you who are organizing this conference, I want to thank you for welcoming me to speak about the role of each profession at all scales. And I'm going to speak to a project that the Van Allen Institute launched at the beginning, well, a few months into the pandemic, in collaboration with the Urban Design Forum, as a kind of example of a one way that the professions can respond in moments of crisis, but really, and I think Nisha's talk also suggested this, that this way of responding doesn't have to be limited to just a time of crisis. And I would say that to ask what the role of the profession is at all scales is kind of the wrong question. To me, the question is, are we asking the right questions and are we listening to the answers? So, you know, in the description for this panel, it says we're going to investigate the state of the allied professions, how our professions can examine and dismantle disparities laid bare by COVID-19 and racial injustice, and how we need to shift our focus and evolve. So this presentation about our project Neighborhoods Now, what is an example of our attempt to listen better, to meet needs concretely where they are, and also at the appropriate resource level. So what you see here is on the right, well, let me start by saying for those of you who are in the conference right now and don't know Van Allen, we were founded 126 years ago, and we work to create equitable cities through inclusive design. The image on the right is an outcome from a recent Van Allen project called Keeping Current. For that project, we embedded with the North Miami, Florida community. It's a small community north of Miami, about 40,000 people, mostly immigrants. And together we transformed that lot that you're looking at, was a vacant lot, flood prone, into a climate adaptive public play space. And that's now being replicated across the town and also in the region. Throughout that process, the community defined and directed solutions customized to their priorities, and the coalitions were created across demographics, across disciplines, and local community and municipal capacity was built. So now they're running with that. They're both stewarding that space, which is a recharge basin and play space, and also replicating it across the town and other lots that can no longer be built on because of flooding. It's that exact community-driven process and those goals, new alliances and local capacity that form the foundation of Neighborhoods Now, the project I'm about to tell you about. Like I said, it was a collaboration with the Urban Design Forum, and the image on the left is an image from one of the forum's gatherings, and there are many coming up that I recommend you listen to. Our project is rooted in the knowledge, and really I feel like I could just sort of repeat what Nisha said, but that the built environment has a profound influence over our health and our long-term well-being. Housing, stability, open space access, transportation choices, any number of other determinants are fundamental components of just and dignified communities. The existence of these fundamental components result from design, planning, policy processes that historically have not been driven by diverse communities and specifically by communities of color. I know that you have been talking about that fact throughout this conference. And we know that the way decisions are made and the voices who shape our built environment matter in the context of broader goals for equity and for anti-racist, just, and inclusive society. So that's the foundation of Neighborhoods Now. Neighborhoods Now is also rooted in the conviction that New Yorkers want to help one another. And so you've been talking about this, as we're all now painfully aware. The pandemic devastated communities of color in New York City and drove an economic crisis in those same neighborhoods. For Neighborhoods Now, we worked with the Association of Neighborhood and Housing Development, and we developed a 5-question survey enabling neighborhood organizations like CDCs and BIDs to share their challenges around reopening and to ask for pro bono guidance if they wanted it. We then did very detailed intake calls with many, many questions, and we immediately got to work in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, Jackson Heights, Queens, along Kingsbridge Road in the Northwest Bronx, and Washington Heights in Upper Manhattan. These are our community partners. We continue working with them, the Bed-Stuy Restoration Corps, and also the Bed-Stuy Gateway BID, Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition, the 82nd Street Partnership in Jackson Heights, and Community League of the Heights. It was a precondition for us that we weren't going to do a kind of abstract, top-down, these are things that people can do in a time of pandemic. We really understood at a very deep level that we needed to hear what people had to tell us about their very specific needs. So these are just the community organizations are, like I said, a mix of CDCs and BIDs and one membership organization. They serve predominantly Black, Latino, and Asian neighborhoods. The median income's low, COVID rates soared. These neighborhoods were struggling economically before the pandemic. And yet the people who live in those communities didn't leave to go to some other place. They house essential workers. And so there was a need to keep small businesses alive and to figure out how to safely move about those communities where people were needing to live in and work throughout from the beginning of the pandemic to now. So as the pandemic took root in our city, the hideously uneven impact it was having quickly became painfully clear, and our city's well-resourced communities and businesses began to purchase the design support they needed to reopen safely. We realized, the Urban Design Forum and Van Allen Institute, that neighborhoods where our essential workers live wouldn't have access to similar resources. Efficiently meeting their needs would require traditional design solutions, but also expertise from a range of professionals whose work touches the public realm, including law, finance, engineering, graphics. Within 6 weeks, we mobilized more than 65 firms and 25 experts to provide support. We estimate that the value of the expertise contributed to date, this is a little bit outdated, is almost $2 million, but that's not the really important value, and we're doing work to evaluate. The really important value is to what extent we really helped civic organizations, cultural organizations, schools, restaurants, all kinds of small businesses. Were we able to help them to survive? So New Yorkers are extraordinarily generous. The firms you see here donated many, many hours, and we heard from many of the participants that they had never worked this way in collaboration with a community organization who was the leading voice in defining the project. And people told us that it was one of the most inspiring projects they've worked on. One of the goals of the project was to have these alliances between some of these firms and their community and the communities they were working with take root and persist over the long term. So more about that in a moment. This is the Neighborhoods Now org chart, just so you could understand how the project is structured. Community partners are at the top in yellow because they speak for their constituents in defining the scope and goals of each team. The wraparound experts that you see in the green bubbles support all the teams. And just as one example of their utility, I'm sure you can imagine the bewildering thicket of rapidly evolving regulations that are still evolving related to what you can and can't do in the public right-of-way. So one of our legal experts was Fried Frank, and they worked with one of our teams to create pamphlets that summarize the city's recent open space initiative for small businesses. And they're available on our website now. All participants were also invited to information sessions with New York City agencies to ask the Parks Commissioner, for example, whether small businesses could temporarily expand into parkland. The answer is no, by the way. But both parks and perhaps more critically, Department of Transportation made senior staff available. So you see the city agencies that we worked with on this project in blue. And at Forum and Van Allen are at the bottom, because we were supporting all the efforts of all of the generous professionals and the passionate leaders of the community organizations who were working quickly to help their communities thrive. So these are some examples of some short-term results. Obviously, there were a lot to do with moving extensions of businesses into the public right-of-way, ways to display retail, pamphlets, reconfigured community events. And then there were long-term, we had hopes for the long-term as well. We're optimistic about the value of this program for the long-term, because we see that our firms have, the coordinating firms and some of the others have developed meaningful relationships that they are continuing after the first 6 weeks of this project, the first phase concluded. And they're seeing through the implementation of shared streets, open space activations, helping to address longstanding building violations and fines, and advocating for citywide policy shifts. And we think this model could serve communities beyond moments of crisis. We think it will help communities build the physical and social resilience they need to weather future public health crises, and also challenges related to climate change. So I'm going to run through a bunch of examples of outcomes. On July 31st, the first cohort of recommendations for those 4 communities that I mentioned, Bed-Stuy, Jackson Heights, Kingsbridge, and Washington Heights, those recommendations were submitted on July 31st, and all those materials are available on the Forum and the Van Allen's websites as free downloads. We also have a public share out on October 6th and 7th. You can join if you want. And by that time, all of the material will be searchable by category, like policy recommendation, or also by keyword like HVAC or restaurant. So right now it's not searchable that way. It will be by the end of the month or the first week of October. For those of you who want to share with your community contacts, there are all kinds of resources. You're seeing one right here. This is signage. The firms created the signage are at the top, Partner and Partners, Pentagram, and 212. They're available in more than 50 signs, and they're available in Arabic, Bengali, English, and Spanish, and they're completely free downloadable signs. Here's the pamphlet that I mentioned. There were 3 of these that were created by the Bed-Stuy Restoration team. Bed-Stuy Restoration led the content. They're on office workers and clients, small business owners, and be a good neighbor. Those are 3 different categories. This is from the office workers and clients pamphlet. And it's meant to be user-friendly resources of how to reopen safely. Also downloadable on the website. This is also downloadable on the website. It's a general license agreement template. It was created by Fried Frank, the law firm that was embedded within each of the community teams. It's for property owners and businesses who want to operate a pop-up on vacant property owned by someone else. And this was a critical tool and resource. Many of the property owners in these communities own like one store or one small building. The Bed-Stuy team came up with a policy recommendation for a land swap. So meaning if you're a restaurant and you want to expand into your neighbor next door to be able to serve socially distantly in the winter, then that restaurant next door is now vacant, you can use this license of agreement to do that land swap. Or similarly, if you have a bus station in front of your restaurant and you want to actually put tables in front of the property next door. So it's this kind of holistic resource that the communities we were told found really valuable. On the right, you're looking at an image from a financial literacy workshop that was done by the Kingsbridge team on how to apply for a PPP loan and other financial resources. We also organized a landlord-tenant mediation workshop in Bed-Stuy. So a range of resources, a completely holistic approach to crisis. And then, of course, a huge range of design solutions. And again, these are on our website and on the forum's website. They're available completely free for download Right now they're organized by community. Soon they'll be searchable. This is from Bed-Stuy Bid. Moody Nolan was the firm who created this. It's an outdoor seating system with modular planting to encourage social distancing. This is from the Jackson Heights team that was led by the Volunteer Architects Limited Collective, the Soil firm. It's a design for shared streets and flexible furniture for a festival that's really important in Jackson Heights every year. And if you've ever been, if you haven't been, you need to go. It's called Viva la Comida. Right now, the permit application that the team worked on has been denied, but they're continuing to work on that permit application. This was done by the Kingsbridge team led by Cook Fox. It's a kit of parts for the backyard of the community partner, which is the Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy. And this kit of parts is available to all of the civic organizations or all of the organizations, and also to anyone who goes on our website and downloads it. This is from the Washington Heights team. It was led by Arup. They proposed this. There's a store in Washington Heights called the Word Up Community Bookshop that is a very important community institution. And this is that team's design for how that Word Up could move out into the right-of-way and have displays and also place for programming. They're building this now, and Northwest Bronx is building that. This is from the Bed-Stuy Restoration Team. It's a DIY planter barricade for outdoor dining and retail. And this is a outdoor shading system that was designed by Datner and MBB for a university neighborhood housing program. So that's just a couple examples of literally probably hundreds of solutions that are up on the websites. And we're driven very specifically from what the community leaders told us they wanted and needed. So here are three of those community leaders. And from Neighborhoods Now, we learned two really important things. One is going back to the question of what's the role of the professions. The role of the professions is to center community voices. And in our project, we found that strategy drove the right result, even when it wasn't a design solution. So on the right, you see Dernis Sinkler from Bed-Stuy Restoration. He told us that a lot of things that we were working on, this is a quote, your team's been able to enhance, think through, and help push us to the next level. In the center is Sandra Lobo. She is the executive director of Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy. Similarly, she told us that her organization, she said, our organization has been fighting for a really long time to do many of these things. And now within 3 weeks, this team is just like, we're talking to this person and they just donated all this stuff. And it was amazing. And then on the left is Medina Sadek. She was until recently the director of the Bed-Stuy Gateway Bid. And in thanking us, Medina said, this project proved to be a lot more than I thought at the beginning. She came to it with certain understandable apprehension. And she said, you bring in these designers and lawyers and other professionals to help the businesses. We really need this kind of support, and I'm thankful. What Medina's talking about, the pivot that she drove actually, to help landlords and tenants work together as a kind of conditioned precedent for implementing design solutions, is exactly the kind of community-driven outcome we hope to achieve. We wouldn't have known that she needed that mediation workshop before any of the design strategies could be efficiently implemented unless she told us that. So the second thing we learned was that we're not just building form and places, we're actually building trust for the long term. And I want to say that when I say we there, I mean all of us in the professions in our work, especially in under-resourced communities. We want to build into our projects a way that the communities can maintain that capacity, and that possibly the relationships that are forged through the project persist over time. In our case, the Jackson Heights team was offered a vacant storefront by one of the local property owners, and now they're embedded in a field office there. And they're offering information and services from that field office and using it as a home base. On the right, you see them using it as a home base for projects like the one where they're actually building a restaurant barrier with that milk crate. The bedside restoration team was inspired to do the same, and they're talking to a property owner now about embedding in that community. The image on the left is from the Kingsbridge team. So we think these relationships will persist for at least a while, and we hope for the long term. For the most part, New York City agencies and our many dedicated public servants understand the need for change. We know that. And they are monitoring the progress of neighborhoods now. Missed a slide. These are supporters. Let's stay with this. They're monitoring the progress of neighborhoods now as a prototype for strategies that could be scaled citywide. There are other cities that are looking at this project as a prototype as well for meeting needs in under-resourced communities. We know, for example, that Chicago and Boston are looking to help and possibly modeling projects on neighborhoods now. Okay, now I'll say we couldn't have done this without our supporters. And we are finding that Neighborhoods Now is already demonstrating a highly effective model for creating alliances across demographic and professional boundaries. It's our hope that the model will live on past this terrible moment as a tool to efficiently mobilize the breadth of resources necessary to improve lives over the short and long term in under-resourced communities. And going back to the beginning, the role of the professions, it's our hope that the project will also be an example and a starting point for how we can meet need where it is and bring in our colleagues from all the allied professions to do that most effectively.
Deborah, thank you so much. I think you're absolutely right. Is that the right question? What is our role? I think as evidenced very clearly in your work with Neighborhood Now, it's the role is defined by the community. You know, we build all this expertise to help them achieve their goals, and it's only effective when we don't predefine our roles, but we work together to understand what that needs to be. And in this case, looks like it's really impressive how much capacity you were able to build and how many examples of interventions that were generated from that collaborative process for these communities that they felt at the end of it all was really worthwhile, and you built those relationships. There are a bunch of things I want to come back to during the Q&A, but thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you.
Jeff, I want to welcome you to share your screen and turn on your video and present.
Yes, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be back in New York. I'm actually from New York at one point. It's great to be back, at least virtually. As Sean mentioned, I am currently in Taipei, which is 4 a.m. In the morning. I'm not sure if I'm exactly awake, but I will try to do my best. Taiwan has been shielded from COVID-19 quite luckily. And the reality here is actually quite different. But before June 24th of this year, I was actually in Seattle. And so I experienced lockdown just like everybody else. And my university was actually the very first in the country to shut down. And as you might remember, Seattle was
Jeff?
first.
Sorry to cut you off, but your screen isn't sharing. It's currently frozen on kind of the multiple slides in PowerPoint view. Could you reshare your screen?
Yes. Okay, does that work now?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so one of the things that I think we have all realized during this pandemic is that despite the lockdown and despite the social distancing requirements, many of us have found other ways to connect. And those connections, including connections across scales, have been critical to helping communities cope with difficulty during the pandemic. I think the work that we just heard about from Nisha and Deborah, I think really kind of speak to that. Those connections, I think, suggest something that we can learn as built environment professions, and this is something that I want to focus on in the next few minutes. So starting with an example closer to home, in Seattle's Chinatown International District, like many other communities in the country, volunteers have played an essential role in doing many things, delivering food to elderly residents who are not able to come come out of their apartments during the lockdown, for example. To support the local businesses during the pandemic, community members organized social media groups to encourage others to shop and dine in the neighborhood. The group, this one in particular, has more than 20,000 members, more than 4 times the number of the resident in the district. So clearly something that I think really transcends the scale. Another remarkable event that show how the sense of scale has really kind of unraveled during the pandemic was this mass organized effort to paint murals on boarded up storefronts, also in the International District. Hundreds of people, artists, volunteers, parents and kids show up for the events to support the local businesses, folks who may or may not be the member of the community per se. And the result was a remarkable transformation of the neighborhoods, from one that was vandalized due to suspected racism to one that really kind of demonstrate these solidarity of people across racial and ethnic divides, and truly remarkable. An act of generosity that has since transcended the boundary of the neighborhood and spread across the city. Different neighborhoods across the city now, you can see similar kind of mural painting done by artists and volunteers. You may also remember that earlier in June of this year, Seattle, and more specifically our Capitol Hill neighborhood, was the site of a 3-week-long occupation in protest against police violence and in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. The Occupy protesters have long been evicted, unfortunately, but one of the things that have been has stayed is this street mural that has now been repainted and will be kept permanently. Another example, and perhaps lesser known landmark during the Occupy movement was the CHOP People's Garden, or the BLM garden, a garden that has become sort of a sanctuary in the Occupy zone, a place that welcomed protesters and non-protesters alike. Gardeners, volunteers, donors, and visitors, you can find them here in the garden. This garden was started by one single individual, Marcus Henderson, who had a vision about guerrilla gardening, took a shovel to the park and started digging. He was soon joined by other protesters and visitors who helped scale up the operation. Within days, an irrigation system was put in with help from volunteers and also materials donated by others. The garden was producing food for the protesters as well as the unhoused inside the park. The garden itself also began to take on meanings and identity. I think that really speak to the broader movement. But perhaps more importantly, what started as a sort of spontaneous guerrilla act has since led to a broad citywide dialogue to rethink how parks and open spaces are planned and designed in Seattle, how to engage the underrepresented communities in particular. And also the Black Star Farmers, the group that really led the making of the garden, has also been working with organizations beyond Capitol Hill in the central area, for example, to use farming and gardening as a way to kind of spur local economic developments and address longstanding disparities in the city. So another instance of connections between scale. My colleagues and I at the University of Washington have also been busy during the pandemic as well. Seattle Street Sync is a project that we have developed to provide people on the streets with access to hand washing, a critical need during the pandemic, as public restrooms, libraries, community centers, and all kinds of public facilities were closed. As a DIY hand washing station, the design combines a sink that anyone can buy online or off the shelf with a bioretention trough that, to cleanse the gray water before we enter the sewer system. The entire units cost less than $400 and provide a much needed amenity, especially in the deserted streets, and as well as a much more kind of dignified experience for the homeless who use the street sink. Much more so than something like this, that the city has been renting and units that really that are costly to maintain and are vandalized easily. There have been also other design proposed that are even more expensive. This one almost as much as 20 times more, and never quite got off the ground. With help of a website that we put together, and also various social media exposure, organizations in and out of Seattle have been making or adopting these units. These are some of these street things that have been hosted by school, nonprofit organizations, religious groups, and so on. We have we even have a newer version of the design, sort of a Seattle Street Scene 2.0, adopted by a Sikh temple just outside Seattle. This project would not have been possible without the support of various organizations, especially Real Change, that sponsored this project, a street newspaper and homeless advocacy organization that paid for the first 10 units and is now working with the city council to put this project in the city budget. Against connections across scale from one kind of prototype street sink to an item in the municipal budget. One last example, mutual aid and community self-help have been widespread during the pandemic around the world. In July, a group of colleagues and I organized a webinar series and invited organizers and activists around the Pacific Rim to share their work. And one of the most remarkable cases that was presented during the webinar was a group called Life Cycles PH from Manila, a volunteer network that fundraises and donates bicycles to healthcare workers so that they could safely go to work during the lockdown without public transportation. This is the amount of money that they have raised back in early April, and the number of bikes they have donated. You can also see that they also match lenders and borrowers of bikes, and really kind of mobilize the public to help the healthcare workers. And example of connections across a scale. The group is now joining others in advocating a safer and more robust cycling infrastructure in Manila. So again, from an act of temporary relief to an advocacy effort to address long-term infrastructure and transportation needs in the city. So there's not enough time for me to do kind of full-on analysis in terms of how these connections across scale are formed kind of precisely, but it suffices to say that these connections would not have happened without the action that the individuals and group have taken, or without the care that we have for each other at the most kind of fundamental level, the agency of individuals and groups in making these initiatives possible, as well as the network that bring people and resources together. And lastly, the collaboration among the individuals and groups that turn this kind of small scale, modest effort into something that is much more substantial in scope and as well as potential impact. And then this, I believe, is a lesson that I think the profession of architecture, landscape architecture and planning can learn to make a greater difference in the work that we do during and beyond the pandemic. The lessons of actions, affect, agency, networks, and collaboration. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, so much. I love how you spoke to scale, in particular, how it relates to like the scale of people and action. You have one person creating a community garden, which then leads to a group of people assisting, and then leading to the city then bringing those folks in and looking to reimagine how they do their work. And I think that's really important to note, and that often gets lost sometimes, how individual action, even though we're seeing plenty of power, inspiring individuals across the world right now acting in response, but that power to, one person really can change the world, I guess, as the saying goes. So thank you so much. I'm gonna invite now Deborah and Nisha to come off mute and turn on their cameras so we can have a Q&A discussion. And folks, attendees, please put questions in the Q&A, in the chat, and I'll ask the panel. But until we start getting some of those in, first, thanks everyone for being here again. I really found you all spoke to kind of the importance of community. That was a thread that is really kind of innate and kind of underlines the work that you do. I guess if you all could kind of speak to that more. I mean, Deborah brings up the point of, our role is really being facilitators, and is that facilitation really more impactful at that community scale versus others? We know it's all connected, but if you could just speak, if you all could kind of speak a little bit more to that.
Well, I don't see it as a facilitator so much as a integrator. I think, I mean, maybe that's a little bit of like splitting hairs, but I think what designers are really good at is, at its best, design looks at like the complete environment of a product, a community. It doesn't really matter what the thing is, but you really have to be a good listener, and you have to come to it with a certain amount of humility, knowing that like there's going to be things that you don't know, and that you really can't come with a preconception about what people need or what they're going to do. So, I mean, I see that as the real role of the profession at any scale. And I think something that I feel strongly about is that when you're making plans for any community at whatever resource level they're at, you have to adjust. You have to make sure that what you're advancing is going to be something that's doable and that's maintainable and that feels right for the place where you're working, and not a kind of like, foreign like thing that parachutes in and lands, but rather something that grows up from the soil where you're starting. I'm sure my colleagues can speak to that at length also.
Thanks for that, Deborah. I think, the two things I wanted to talk about, when you're talking about communities is, I think we as a profession should really recognize communities as experts. I think there's often this, expertise or technical expertise is like sort of this thing that we bring to the table, and that's sort of the way we've been trained. We're like the experts. And while we are in conversation with communities, and building on what Deborah said or Jeff said, is that as listeners, we need to sort of really let communities lead and understand that their lived experience and their ideas for how solutions should be formulated is an expertise. And so there should not be a distinction because I have a degree in planning. We have different roles, obviously, but I think we need to flip this idea of thinking of expertise only living in the professional world, but also in the community realm, in the communities we serve. I think the other thing to me when I talk about the profession is thinking about our work not in isolation of a project or a place. That's always really important because it's grounded in that work, but recognizing the systems and the structures within it sits. And then in this moment, it becomes acutely clear that those systems and structures are underpinned by 400 years of racism, of systemic oppression. And so to me, it's also really important for our work to have a restorative lens. So what are you doing to sort of acknowledge how this built environment or the structure has been created, who created it, whose voice was at the table, and what solutions are you offering with communities to offer a different way that centers the voices that have not been included. So.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. My professional focus has been on community engaged design for a very long time, and especially working with immigrant communities. And one thing we have learned over time is that in working with people who have been kind of historically kind of marginalized, is that we need to focus on capacity building. That is not, like listening is critical, but it's also important that people can find their voice and can articulate, can connect their life experiences to a particular project, for example, or a policy, and to have the ability to kind of organize themselves and hold the professionals accountable. And so I think that, so it's not just finding ways for profession to learn how to engage the community, but also for the community themselves to have the capacity as well. And that something that we noticed during the pandemic is that all the capacity building that we have done before actually play a critical role in helping the community respond to the crisis on their own terms.
I think you raise a really important point, Jeff, because, and it's the same thing that Nisha's saying, building capacity is restorative. And I know, like, when we were working on Neighborhoods Now, I had a conversation with one of the community leaders, and that person said, I know these are a huge amount of services and it's so great that people are being so generous, but I feel like it's like drinking from a fire hose. I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing. Our whole office is like 2 people. And, like she felt anxious about like saying that to people. And about, because she recognized on the one hand that people were being generous, and on the other, they weren't recognizing what her capacities were. So, we worked on helping her both to help her increase her capacity, but also to have the designers, the whole like gigantic team of designers, understand that like, even though they had that immense impulse to help, that they had to modulate it as a response, as opposed to their idea of what help she needed.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I think that's something that I often felt in school and even in practice is we often, and working in the private sector, we have clients who are working at a certain scale, you know, be it city agencies, metropolitan transit agencies, who, you know, they have their notion of how something is, and then, you know, we do our outreach, however that may be. You know, unfortunately, oftentimes it is kind of checking the box. We don't really work to build that capacity of the ultimate end users. I just think that's a really great point about capacity building. I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of and you all kind of brought it together, and I think even the idea of being a professional or allied professionals who build capacity kind of speaks to us needing to be more than a designer in a lot of ways. You know, we go to school for, you know, to learn GIS, or, you know, we practice to learn how to, you know, make renderings, or you know, have certified plans and drawings, but we have to connect people to policy. We have to interpret policy, and share with communities how they, you know, how they're impacted by it. So I just was wondering, you know, do you all feel like your actual role has expanded? Maybe not a prescribed one, but like, do you see yourselves as just designers anymore? And talk to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, my personal
easy question.
background, yeah, I mean, and I think, I'm sure my colleagues would agree, like my personal background is I started my career as an attorney, and I practiced for a while, and then I went back to school and studied landscape architecture. So, I mean, I'm comfortable with this idea that like things have to come together, and sometimes you think that someone needs this particular thing, but actually they don't need that, they need this other thing. It's like what Medina Sadik said to us about like Bed-Stuy, like we can't build restaurant barriers because the landlords and the tenants aren't even speaking to each other. So the mediation workshop had to happen first. I think that's the thing, you know, it's like, you know, you go to school for landscape architecture like I did, and no one teaches you how to build like a restaurant barrier out of milk crates, right? That's not what you learn in design school. But like, if you understand, you're listening to someone like, we need this fast. We got some resources here. We need to do it fast, cheap, and get it up. Then you have to be open to like other ways of doing things.
Yeah, I think to put that question in the context of working with the community, I think it's you really need to have a different mindset coming into a community as a professional. You know, in the context of a community, it's hard to kind of define a problem as an architectural problem or a planning problem. Everything is so interconnected. You know, economic problems, spatial problems, you know, health issues. These are all kind of interconnected. And so one thing I tell my students is that you know, our capacity as a professional is going to be always limited. We cannot do everything ourselves, and therefore we need to find ways to find people who have more expertise than we are on issues that matter for the community. So I think one of the key kind of skill is to find people who have those capacity, or have those expertise, and also have the ability to kind of, you know, to reach out and collaborate with the people that are needed, you know, for a particular issue or a problem. And so that, so it's not, you know, our role has expanded for sure, but it's not possible for us to do everything. We need to find ways to collaborate.
Yeah, I think I just want to echo both of what Deborah and Jeff said, is that one of the roles that I find that we find ourselves, I find myself in, that is something that is grown in the profession, is like the convener, right? It's like who do you, you know, you're faced with an issue or a problem, and you know, you want to include communities, but what are the other people that would help lead to a solution, whether it's other designers or allied professions, or like government or other community-based organizations. So I think that, you know, the convener and integrator role is something that has really come to the forefront. And I think the other thing is, you know, as somebody who, this is sort of like, as somebody who does like a lot of work in communities around that. There's another part of this work that I think, blends the personal and professional, which is you're also like you're a planner of creating community, right? So when you're creating events and things like that, we spend a lot of time, and we haven't sadly done them in 6 months, is how do you create an inclusive and joyful place for collaboration? And that comes from anything from like thinking about things I never thought I would think about, which is, childcare, food, translation, interpretation. Maybe I'm not doing it all, but like ensuring those things are part and parcel. There's, they collectively add to this space that we want to create as an inclusive space.
Right. And I think part of that, being able to build that inclusive space and convening has to do a lot with something you all touched on is the idea of trust. Like the people we work with have to trust, we have to earn their trust, really. And one of the questions that we received is kind of harkening back to the concept that IFOMA raised that I believe is kind of rooted in the Black Space Manifesto, an organization that she's a part of, is this idea of the speed of trust. How do you build trust in communities trying to respond rapidly? We see the need, it's extreme. We're in a time where response, particularly in New York City in March and April, and other cities across the country, it was, we have to respond now. The longer we wait, the more susceptible of our communities. But how do you build that trust while you try to do that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can respond to that. I think this is one question I was asked at another webinar. I think trust is something that really takes time to develop. It's not something that you can develop, in a matter of days or even weeks or months. It takes years to develop those trusts. But with with an urgent crisis like this, I think one thing we could do is to work with people that are trusted by the community. Right? So people, the organizations that have already been working with the community for a substantial amount of time, we don't have to reinvent those trusts. I think we can work with people that have those connections and have those relationships as a kind of first step.
I agree with that. I think it's critically important that if you want to help in a fast way, that you find the right partner to do that with. Otherwise, it will be much harder and less effective than it could otherwise be.
100% agree. I mean, I think for us in a lot of our work, we work with local partners or partners that are already trusted or conveners, whether it's faith-based organizations or service providers or all of that. I think, that survey we mentioned, we would not, if we just called someone and said, hey, tell us all how this pandemic is impacting you, we would not get the same response as organizers and people that these people knew personally. So both the reach and the richness of the data was totally facilitated because there was somebody trusted. I think the other thing in a rapid moment is to sort of think of both the sort of usual suspects and then things that you might not think about. I think for the census outreach, we sort of were working with faith-based organizations and community service providers, but then we also sort of like really looking at other sort of social infrastructure, bodega owners, New York City, that is a community institution and people have grown up with them, barbershops and salons, maybe they were shuttered, but they, I think there is both sort of organizational infrastructure, and then there's also just local leaders, people that are trusted, people who are sitting on the block and things like that. But 100% agree that you don't need to reinvent it. There are people in each community that are leaders and institutions that you can tap into.
Right. Thank you so much. I think oftentimes we do try to reinvent the wheel when it's really just about finding the right resource, finding the right people, and working with them rather than taking it on ourselves. We have another question here in the Q&A. How can we as designers and planners educate and inform clients to support and appreciate the progressive values that we may want to bring to a project? That's definitely I'd love to hear all your answers. That's something I struggle with personally as well. You know, just another kind of lead in is with my organization, I meet with a bunch of my colleagues where we have kind of a working group trying to identify ways we can instill similar principles kind of at Hester Street, like lead with your values, work from those values, and have a consistent value across our global organization, and being able to say, you know, we want to work for equity explicitly, but maybe some of our clients in other cities who, you know, aren't, maybe they're, you know, they're not as well versed, they haven't had this experience, they haven't thought about it before, maybe they're, you know, antagonistic against, you know, so how would you, you know, how would you bring these kind of values, valuing community, centering that, working kind of that bottom up way rather than top down?
Yeah, I think that's something that I've also, you know, pre-Hester Street, I worked for 10 years in architecture firm, planning firm, and that's something that I've grappled with definitely through my career. I think one of the things that we often talk about, you know, we talk about being mission driven and, you know, who we're centering, but we also sort of talk about when you design and processes or places or resources for those that are most vulnerable, everyone benefits, right? Because you are creating resources and structures that are going to be accessible to the people who would get there and as well as the people that are not included. And so you, if you know, if your goal is to sort of create an open space or create something that is used by all of these people, you know, there's sort of there's that tack about, you know, when you design for you center those that are most excluded, you're going to benefit everyone because the people who are advantaged or privileged are going to get that as well. So it's not a zero-sum game. I think that's one of the things that we've really talked about, is that it's I think there is a perception in this country that there is not enough for everyone. And I think there's a really great book that just came out, but Heather McGhee talks about this, that, you know, the impacts of racism have not just impacted Black communities, they've of course disproportionately impacted, but they've impacted everyone. We're all getting less when we don't center equity. So I think that's something that we talk a lot about with people who are reticent to go there. And then we also have, those are sort of like our, you know, further one tactic, and then the other one is we find different ways to you know, address that, to really sort of talk about what are your goals, and then, you know, who do you want to have to the table, and sort of really come back to, you know, having people really align with, because I think in the end most people want to create a place that's inclusive, and it's a way that you approach it and you kind of keep chipping away at it. Either totally, you know, upfront, or also just as you go through a project, just kind of have that as your North Star. Like, what are you doing to advance equity? Can I do it here? Can I do it here? Can we be, who are we engaging? Who are we contracting with? Who are we hiring? Whose voices are here? There's not one path there is multiple ways to get there.
I totally agree with everything that Nisha just so eloquently said. And I think, you know, if there was ever a moment to get people to see that where our common ground is, this is an unfortunate but possibly useful outcome of what we're going through, because we understand now as a culture, and, you know, these things tend to disappear after crises, but this is a lengthy crisis. What we understand now is we're all tied together. Our well-being is all tied together. And so I find when you're trying to convince something of someone, if you start with a place of common ground like that, like, look, you know, you might leave the city to go somewhere else because you have a second home, but the fact is that the people who are essential workers and your life, whether you stayed or not, are intimately tied together. We all rise or fall together, and this has shown that. So I think it's a time to kind of make that. But I agree with Nisha that it's like, it's incremental to trying everything all at once.
Well, one thing I would add is, you know, to create opportunities for, you know, like the face-to-face interactions, or, you know, to actually see something with their own eyes. I don't work, as an educator, I don't work quite a bit with private clients, and people often come to me with with a certain agenda already. But in the context where I work, my students are kind of my clients, and so I think one thing I find really transformative is that when they are able to go to a site, meet with people that they're designing for, and listening, directly from the community, that has such a strong impact on the way that really kind of reshape the way they see the problem. And that kind of applies to some of our community clients as well, when we often have to deal with conflict between different groups. And part of that conflict, I think, emerged out of the kind of lack of understanding or appreciation from a different perspective. And when people are able to kind of, sit down face to face and then listen to each other, I think they come away with a different sense of what the issues are and potential kind of direction for kind of resolving those conflicts.
So true.
All right, thank you so much. We have 2 minutes, so I want to try and fit in one last question. But you've all kind of spoken to various examples of community-driven design practices that have yielded very beautiful designs, very useful legal notes, very useful pieces of social infrastructure, and how can we ensure that these outcomes or these processes, more importantly, are institutionalized within our power structures, be them in New York community boards, city council, our state how can we institutionalize of what comes out of this community-based work, so that our processes, our institutions better reflect our communities in that way?
Well, I think you already kind of answered the question.
Did I?
I think working with lawmakers, I think, is the critical part of trying to institutionalize something. Put things in a budget, change the law, and create the kind of the policy kind of coalition that is necessary to move an agenda forward. And so that's something that we learned from the Street Sync project, is that we did think about working with the city council until the real change advocacy organization reminded us that this is something that we need to do.
I would agree with Jeff. I feel like often what I think I learned through my work, my profession, my work at Hester Street that I didn't learn in school, or I didn't sort of internalize before, is that the piece from when you take a building or a project to institutionalization is that you have to engage with local government and advocate and have those relationships to then incorporate that into future things. And so that's something, engaging with politics often is sometimes things we don't want to do, but I think it's really important, and because in the end, that's actually where things become real and institutionalized.
But the model that you spoke of earlier, or maybe you've mentioned it, Jeff, of like really connecting with someone who is, or a community-based organization who knows their community well, to me, that's the key. I actually think for Neighbors Now, we saw that the groups that really embedded with and quickly developed like a very intimate knowledge of the needs of those communities, they were the best integrators of what the needs were. And I think our sort of 19th century model of there's planning, there's parks, there's DOT, it doesn't really work so well anymore in this kind of environment. I think we need to rethink actually the structure. It's a structural problem. And I guess I would offer the idea that I think we need to be having like integrators, and maybe that's community-based organizations in each community who can speak to what the needs are and then connect with others, especially now that we see that we're probably for the foreseeable future going to want to be able to get to our most important needs by walking or biking.
Right. So I really want to have this conversation forever, but we're nearing the end of our time. It's I just want to thank you all for taking the time to kind of speak to all of the work that you're doing now in a very, high pressure, and risky, but also really impactful work that you've all done across various geographies, virtually, in person, and really kind of dispelling the notion that we only have one role to play, or speaking to how important it is to get rid of those 19th century silos. And one thing I really value about this conference is how there are so many practitioners across these, landscape architecture and planning, but also others kind of coming together and realizing that working together is really important in these ways. So thank you all so much for joining us. Again, hope, Jeff, you can go to sleep now, or if you're up for it, join the happy hour. But really, thank you all for taking the time today to speak with us and close out this conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting us, and thank you to my colleagues. This has been a really great conversation.
Yes, same. Thank you, Anisha, Jeff. Great to hear you speak. I enjoyed it a lot. And you too, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, thank you, Sean.
No problem. Great. So with that, I'd like to introduce Liz Moskalenko, who will be delivering our closing remarks today.
Wow, what a conference. Good afternoon, everyone. As Sean mentioned, I am Elizabeth Moskalenko, the president of the New York chapter of the American Society of Landscape Architects. I want to thank all of you for joining us these last 2 days for this inspiring event. I want to give special thanks to Max Sokol, APA New York Metro Chapter President, and Ben Prosky, AIA New York Executive Director, our ASLA New York Executive Director, Diana Sferrazza-Katz, and our lead organizer, Annie Berglund, Secretary of ASLA New York, along with our entire committee who invested in this incredible effort. Thank you to Jonathan Croca, Matthew Cunningham, Renee Dillon, Victoria Deschina, Gregory Haley, Gloria Lau, Jessica Morris, Adam Roberts, and Sean Scott. Thank you. Most especially, thank you to our amazing speakers who have generously donated their time to make this event possible. Next, I want to take a moment to remind those seeking LACES to please complete the quizzes and evaluations by the end of the weekend that Diane has posted in the chat. Please take a screenshot or copy and paste the links so that we can close out of the webinar and open up to the happy hour. Also, a quick plug for our upcoming ASLA New York programming. Please save the following dates. October 21st is our LARE group study session. October 22nd, we have our 4 CEUs programming, which will be site design strategies for mental health and wellness. And on October 26th, our 3rd planting panel with the series with New York Upstate Chapter, Designing with Plants. We hope to see you there. We are always looking for fresh or returning faces to join our committees. Please reach out to myself or Diane if you're interested. Now, before we break into this happy hour, I'd like to come full circle to the beginning of our conference, exploring critical issues across our professions, across the scales to crucial points made by our day 1 keynote, Ifeoma, challenging us to design thoughtful cities, as she iterated 3 principles that really tie together our entire conference. Thoughtful cities are co-created with community, focused on equity and justice, and move at the speed of trust. Let's hold on and employ these principles as we move forward in our lives and our profession. Well, there it is, the conclusion of our conference. Happy Friday. The link for our happy hour is linked in the chat below, as well as email to your inboxes. I look forward to seeing you shortly at 5 p.m. with your cocktail, mocktail, seltzer, and potential guest appearance by a furry friend or human. Thank you.
Hooray! Great, thank you.
They can, they can hear us probably.
So you had happy hour.
They can hear us, but
I know. Well, let's go to happy hour.
okay. So I want to leave it just for a minute, but I did email it to them.
I didn't receive it, so.
You didn't get it? Oh, because you're probably not on the registrant. Okay, now I'll forward it to you. Sorry.
It's okay.
Because it was, I don't know if the panelists got it, so I emailed it to, I told the panelists too.
Okay. Well, I can.
I'm going to send it to you. You send it to the panelists.
Yep.
They can hear us, but I don't really care.
That's okay.
I don't really care.
We're just being primed for happy hour.
All right, I just sent it to you. If you can make sure the panelists all have it.
Okay.
Gloria's laughing.
Can't hear you. Okay, so we're going to close down this session and see you in
the happy hour.
Happy hour. Oh, we have a request to share the quiz and the evaluation again.
Again, okay. All right. I'm doing that right now.
From Simon. Hi, Simon.
I'm coming.
Okay.
Okay, there you go, Simon.
Okay.
Annie, you got the happy hour link?
The email?
Yeah.
I did. Yep. Thank you.
All right, we only have 16 left, so I guess we can go. Should I close it out?
Okay, yeah, we'll count down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, I'll meet you at happy hour. Bye. Bye.